Thank you very much, Alice. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome you to Sciences Po, to our journalism school. Interestingly, Sciences Po is 150 years old, but the oldest school in Sciences Po, which is School of Journalism, was created just less than 20 years ago in 2004, and that's the oldest school. Sciences Po has been restructured all the time, and in the last 20 years, we moved all master's programs into schools, and École de Journalisme, the journalism school, is the oldest school. After that, we created School of Law, School of International Affairs, School of Public Affairs, School of Research, Urban School, and now School of Journalism is a very special place here at Sciences Po. It's the smallest school in Sciences Po, but it's also a school with a very well-defined project, which is to train journalists for France, Europe, and the world. Now, journalism is a very special profession, as we say in France, métier. That's very hard to translate. The art, the artisanship, the craft probably is the best word. Now, when students enter Sciences Po right after high school, they usually think that I want to become president of the republic, I want to become prime minister, or I want to become a journalist. Now, very few of them become journalists. And the reason for that is it's a very difficult job, it's a very difficult occupation. And here you'll see today, we take this training very seriously. The school only has about 160 students, and the school involves about 160 teachers. Not all of them are full-time faculty members. Actually, the vast majority of them are not full-time faculty members of Sciences Po. They are practitioners, they're reporters, they're investigative journalists themselves. They're professionals in digital business, they're politicians or policy advisors. And as such, the School of Journalism actually puts together a curriculum which trains people for the challenges of our times, which are many. Now, one of those challenges is exactly at the center of this conference, and this conference is not the first time. It's not the first time we hold this conference. The New Practices of Journalism, NPDJ. Why am I saying NPDJ? Because this is a hashtag. So this is the time when you actually look up your social media and launch tweets or X's or whatever it's called now with this hashtag, so it becomes viral as of right now. So this is the 15th edition of this conference, and each year we discuss different issues, different challenges that the profession of journalism faces. This time around, it's AI, artificial intelligence, AI and news. Now, when we talk about AI, and for me it's also an important issue as an academic, as a researcher. I work on information in non-democratic regimes. I work on the use and abuse of information by non-democratic and populist leaders, and I work also on disinformation and misinformation on social media. And we see how AI can completely transform our democratic institutions through affecting exactly the news. The news ecosystem can be completely transformed by artificial intelligence, and this is exactly what we are going to talk about in this conference. Now, even before this conference, the Journalism School of Sciences Po understood how important those issues are. We teach a special course, AI and Certified News, starting next January. We also launched a podcast in French on those issues. For people who don't speak French, I should advertise my own podcast, which is in English, and which goes season by season. First season was on environment. This particular season is on populism on non-democracies, where I talk to researchers of Sciences Po who do research on those issues, and we talk about their research. And next season will be exactly on digital transformation, when we'll talk more about technological challenges. The podcast in French, it is exactly on the challenges of our times related to technological, industrial, and post-industrial transformation. So one of the biggest challenges, of course, is social responsibility. And when we talk about Sciences Po, we, of course, always think about the students that we train, which leaders they will become when they join the professional environment. And when we train them, we think not just about hard skills and knowledge, we also think about soft skills and ethics. And that, of course, is especially important when we talk about issues like AI, because whenever we talk about AI, one of the most fundamental challenges is, of course, the ethical dimensions. And here, it's once again, this is something which is at the very core of Sciences Po's project. We live in a time of rapid technological transformation, and it looks like people who write code are the kings of the world. They can move fast and break things. Myself, I was trained as a computer scientist in Russia, whatever, 30 years ago. That will be 30 years ago this year. I graduated from Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. And then I saw how social science trumps hard science. You can be the top physicist or top mathematician in the world, but if your country is going through major social, economic, political transformation, people who understand this transformation win. And this is exactly what the world is facing today. Yes, there are people who are billionaires because they know how to write code, but as a society, we need to think about how to harness the power of AI in particular. And we already see that the very same people who work on AI are trying to warn us, actually sign petitions calling for slowing down the development of generative AI, because this particular generation of technology may actually be dangerous for our society. And in that sense, people who work on the social science side of things, people who think about economic, social, political implications of this technological change, may actually be more relevant to our success, our performance, and actually our survival as a species. And in that sense, I'm very happy that we are here at Sciences Po talking about these issues in an interdisciplinary way. The interdisciplinarity here is a very important part of our project at Sciences Po, but also at École de Journalisme, at the journalism school, where we bring people from different disciplines to teach new generations of journalists to learn new things, to be able to reach across disciplinary boundaries, to talk to people with different backgrounds. And I'm very happy that here today we'll also talk to people who write code. And once again, it sounds like I am too critical of these people, even though I was one of them. But actually, we need to talk to each other, people who develop technology and people who understand the use of technology by our societies, by our businesses, by our governments, by our adversaries. So these different parts of our societies need to talk to each other, and that's part of our project at Sciences Po. The other important dimension of this dialogue is the international debate. Now, School of Journalism has a very important international ambition, depending on the year, depending on how you define national borders. Here in Europe, they are a bit in flux, but about a third or quarter of our graduates of the School of Journalism work abroad. And School of Journalism has a long time established and well-functioning double degree program with Columbia School of Journalism, and I welcome here Dean Cobb, the Dean of Columbia University School of Journalism. We really appreciate this partnership, and this transatlantic partnership and the dialogue on these particular issues is very important, exactly because there are different views, different attitudes, different comparative advantage that we can bring to this dialogue. US is the place where technology is developed. Europe is the place where we know how to regulate technology. US exports technology, we export regulation. And this is exactly the debate which is happening right now. And certain things we can do in Europe cannot be done in the US for political economy reasons, because some of those companies are too politically powerful. Some of these things cannot be done because of the First Amendment, which protects freedom of speech, but also protects private business from content moderation. So a lot of experimentation which happens in regulation in Europe, fortunately or unfortunately, cannot be carried out in the US. So this dialogue is something that will make both sides more successful, more knowledgeable, and eventually, hopefully, will bring together those perspectives and help us to meet those challenges of transformation of this particular craft, of this particular profession, journalism, in the era of artificial intelligence. Once again, thank you very much for being so numerous, as we say in French, si nombreux. Many thanks for participating in this 15th edition of the conference Nouvelles Pratiques Du Journalisme, and welcome to Sciences Po. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Okay, what's happening? I'll just hold it. Good morning. My name is Jelani Cobb, and I am the Dean of Columbia Journalism School. I'm very happy to be here with you all today. Unfortunately, the provost has left me very little to say with his assessment of the nature of the problem. I will tell you something to illustrate the point that you made about the importance of the context of social sciences and technology, is that in 2016, as we experienced political convulsions in the United States, which everyone in this room is familiar with, a large driving force of the division and the polarization that we saw in our society and in our politics was related to social media and social media platforms. And we proceeded with this kind of naive idea that we would, through technology, create this kind of utopian world, and that we would have a new dawning heyday of free speech and expression. And we had not thought about the implications of this. We had not really thought about what we've learned about human beings and the kind of fractious way that we have proceeded in our societies for very many years, and what had to be done in order to create even the foundations of social equality that we can now sometimes take for granted. And so in 2016, as we began to see forces that were gaining momentum and gaining power, and many of the kind of voices from within the political and academic establishments were shocked by this. And at the same time, people began beating a path to the parts of college campuses that had fallen into disfavor. In our drive for our pursuit of STEM and our glorification of technology, we had tended to overlook those parts of human learning and human knowledge that can help us understand who we are individually, who we are societally, how we function collectively, and the context in which that technology existed. We confront the same sorts of questions again in the context of AI. And so my comments will address some of this, and I'll get started. So artificial intelligence has been a part of our culture and part of our imagination for a really long time. There's a book, a collection of writing that is called, it kind of turns the saying, the things dreams are made of, on its head, and refers to our imaginations and saying, the dreams things are made of. And so in our imagination, in science fiction, and in our cultural productions, we'd conceived of artificial intelligence long before it became publicly accessible. Whether we're thinking about Star Trek, Lieutenant Commander Data, or Skynet, it has been in our consciousness for a really long time. And our landscape around this is rapidly changing. This is no surprise to anyone here. There's a lot of discussion about the future of AI, and with it, both excitement and fear. And it's difficult to parse what to listen to. Not even experts seem to be on the same page necessarily about this. As anyone who's seen the infighting at OpenAI and the kind of back and forth over their endeavors, which has been a staple in the news of late. And without clarity, it's hard to discern what all these changes mean for journalism. First, we should think about what AI is. It is an unignorable force which journalism has to organize itself around. Exactly as it did with the introduction of the commercial internet in the 1990s and with the mobile social web in the 2000s. To journalism students at Columbia and Sciences Po, the technology is a long way from replicating the reporting and production work that you all are training to do. ChatGPT and other types of generative AI are technologies that cannot do anything more than mimic human connection and original insight. A large language model cannot knock on doors, listen to answers, push for better answers, and ask deeper questions. What it can do is create both opportunities and risks. And so when I talk to my students about this, I say that on its own, ChatGPT or any other language model can't discern whether or not a politician is taking a bribe. It can't discern just in and of itself whether or not there are policies that are advantageous or disadvantageous to the public. It can't tell on its own how a particular politician may vote or things that will affect your individual lives. Realistically, when we think about the way that this technology operates, it will likely amplify more than it will change. As I say to my students all the time, for those of us who are inclined toward ethical uses of the technology, it would allow us to do much more, even more ethically. For those of us who are inclined toward unethical uses, it will allow us to do the same. So, generative AI makes a fabulous assistant, helping journalists do more than their current skills and resources will allow. As my colleague Drew Milmeda will show when it comes to his presentation, we already have students who are using this for basic coding and data work. And it is helping organizations, both multinational and local, experiment in ways that AI can assist with a variety of tasks. For instance, automatically writing public safety incidents into the content management systems of the Minnesota newspaper, the Brainerd Dispatch. Translating Spanish language news alerts for the newspaper El Vocero de Puerto Rico, using the National Weather Service's English language data, and automatically transcribing recorded videos and summarizing those transcripts to create the article's initial outline at the San Antonio, Texas television station KSAT-TV. Much of journalism's foray into AI is this kind of invisible progress behind the walls of the newsroom, assisting journalists in tasks often considered tedious. The goal is to free us up to do the actual work of reporting, the writing that newsrooms so rely upon. And with newsrooms shrinking, we know journalists need to do more with less. Much of this progress is happening because of open source development. France is home to the AI company Hugging Face, the #1 place for these kinds of open and accessible tools. Born in France and founded in New York City, this company represents the great collaboration between our nations. Thanks to Hugging Face, you can try almost any AI tool or technique that is released in the world of academia and often industry. But as is always the case, those with lower ethical standards can use these new tools more efficiently than those of us who are bothered and concerned about consequences. We have seen news using AI-generated stock photos to represent the Palestinian conflict. We've all suffered slogging through the search results of hundreds of automated reports on everything from product reviews to mortgage rates. This is a fire hose of misinformation, and it can lead to further abstraction of reader trust in the news. Plus, this cheap to free production machine will push models for journalism even harder at a point where many are already breaking. We can hope journalists will be freed by AI technologies to do more important work, but there's a risk that they will be freed from work completely, from all but the most mission-driven organizations. The risks are not just posted, and we actually are seeing this in the United States, I should add, where we now, our crisis is profoundly centered in our local news, and we are now seeing local news organizations that have no actual reporters. And so entirely automated outlets that are giving information that can't properly be referred to as journalism. And so this is one of the areas in which we will likely see an exacerbation and amplification. And as it has the forces of capitalism and civil society are vying to shape its progress, the development of AI, just like the development of the web and social media, is a human story about how power is exercised. Our brief as journalists is to investigate, understand, and help our audiences navigate these changes while navigating it ourselves. Journalists have an opportunity to take advantage of these tools. They can use this moment to take our industry forward. We do not have to be the victims to poor AI-generated articles. Rigorous, ethical reporting is still valuable to our world, perhaps more valuable than it has ever been. And these tools can help journalists do it better and faster. Technology is what we make of it. HAL 9000 is not our inevitable future. Journalists can embrace these tools and utilize them in innovative, exciting ways. Yes, it is fair to be intimidated by machines that create text, but remember, that is not all that journalists do. The actual spirit of journalism is reporting, sourcing, and storytelling. And AI is no reason for us to believe that these skills are not as important as they always have been. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. David Caswell, now on stage. Thank you for that. Maybe the mic here with the screen will be better. David Caswell is the founder of Storyflow. He was before at the BBC. I saw online talented and brilliant conference with you on stage. That's why we invite you, and we hope you could do it again for the floor in Paris. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just getting the slides up here. So what I'm going to do here is spend 20 minutes to make AI in news kind of real, to kind of go through where this stuff came from, kind of what it is at its first principles with lots of examples, and then also to get into some implications for some of the capabilities that these tools can do. So let's just jump right in. There's a lot here, and this will go quite quickly. Okay, so AI is just getting started, and as a bit of a background, there are two kinds of computation that we can use to automate things in any field. The one that we're most familiar with is coding, and so coding is just a little set of instructions. And the thing about coding is that in order to code something, you have to understand the task that you're doing. That's the first step. And then you write code that does the task, and then the computer does the task using the code. But we now have this second kind of computation for automation, machine learning. And the main kind of machine learning that we're working with now, deep learning, it's a neural network. It's a network that's got lots of little connections between these nodes. And what we do is we show the network lots of pairs of inputs and outputs, and we build up this set of connections between the inputs and the outputs. And that's training a model. That's the model. Then once we've done that, we can show it an input that it's never seen before, and it can give us an output. And that's a neural network. That's all that's happening there. It's actually quite simple. And in order to do this, we have to collect a large body of examples of inputs and outputs. We have to do that. And then we have to train the model. We have to build up what are called weights, these little connections, that convert the inputs into the outputs. And then once we have that, the computer can use that model to convert new inputs into outputs. And the key thing to keep in mind here is this. Machine learning lets us automate tasks that we do not understand how to do. To code something, we have to understand how to do it. To do machine learning, we don't have to understand how to do the task. So here's a simple example. How do we understand how to tell the difference between a cat and a dog in a photograph? It's something that we do effortlessly. It's obvious. But to describe that in enough detail to write code that would do that is essentially impossible. But if we have lots and lots of pictures of cats and dogs, we can train a model, and we label them, cat or dog. We can train a model so that we can show it a picture of an animal and get a response for that. And so that's an example of automating a task that we don't understand how to do. And this was actually a very important moment in the development of AI in 2012, what's called the ImageNet moment. This is exactly what it was doing. Here's another task or category of tasks that we don't know how to do, and that's language. We don't understand how to do tasks with language in enough detail to do it systematically. The field of linguistics was basically founded by Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky says, we don't really understand what language is all these years later, but we have lots and lots and lots of examples of inputs and outputs. And the way it works with language is the inputs are essentially large blocks of text, sentences or paragraphs or even whole texts. And the outputs are the next word that that text requires. And we can do that again and again and again, and we can build up this sequence of predicting one word and then moving along a word and another word and moving along a word. And what that does is, we call this the prompt and the response, but what that does is, it gives us access to essentially everything that's expressible in language, because language itself, everything that's been written, everything that's been said in the world, is just one word after another. Language is a linear phenomena. And when we do this at enormous scale, and the scale here is truly vast, all of this intelligent behavior emerges. So here's an example of intelligent behavior from a large language model. This is from GPT-2 in 2019. And the prompt here for GPT-2 is, what is better, laptop or desktop? And the response is, what's better, a desktop or a laptop? What's better, laptop or desktop? I am really wondering what the answer is. Post it on, blah, blah, blah. If I had to choose, I'd choose the desk since I don't want to have to work with a mouse or keyboard. And it's not unrelated to the prompt, but it's not very coherent. It very much looks like copy and paste or some kind of approximation, some kind of very, very simplistic attempt to get to the answer, but really no finesse at all. This is 2019, and this model had 1.5 billion parameters. These are roughly these little nodes in the network. So 2019. So here is 2023. This is GPT-4. It has 1.76 trillion nodes in the network. And this is the same prompt. So the prompt is, what is better, laptop or desktop? The answer depends on your specific needs, as both laptops and desktops have their strengths and drawbacks. Here are a few considerations. Portability, laptops are generally better if you need mobility. Performance, customizability, upgradability, price, ergonomics, maintenance, screen size. So if you were to give me 2 or 3 days to just focus on writing some bullet points that answer that question, what's better, laptop or desktop, I could not do a better job. I'm pretty good at writing. I could not do a better job if I had 3 days to do this. This is essentially perfect. And this is what, just predicting the next word, one after the other, this is what it can extract if done at vast scale. And this isn't just sort of like a random progress kind of a thing. This is actually very predictable. So here's a graph from an academic paper showing a bunch of different models. Those little dots there are models. And there's the parameters we talked about on the right, the size of the training data set, and the computation that's applied on that. If we plot all that on a graph against essentially what's called the test loss or the accuracy, it's a straight line. It's actually a logarithmic scale, so it's an exponential function, but here it's a straight line. And that's a very, very interesting phenomena that doesn't actually get enough attention. It implies that these models seem to follow some kind of a natural law, perhaps. And what that implies in turn is that the only limits are really the data and the computation. And the computation is kind of a temporary limit, because there's a shortage of chips, basically. And so what that implies in turn is that AI will match or exceed human ability in every task for which we have data at scale. And there are a lot of teams, big teams, well-resourced teams working on this. And those teams, there's kind of two schools or two camps in those teams. There's the accelerationists who want to move this stuff forward very quickly, and there's the decelerationist who want to slow this stuff down. The accelerationists are winning. So this is the outcome of the board dispute at OpenAI a few weeks ago. And I think it's also behind the setback in the EU AI Act in the last month. I think the accelerationists, the people who want to speed this up, are actually winning. And so the way this sort of expresses itself in the world, I mean, we're all using ChatGPT. I'll bet you everybody in this room pretty much has used ChatGPT. Everybody's familiar with that. But there's a whole kaleidoscope of similar foundation models. These are huge models, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. And they're not just coming from the US. Mistral from France is there. We've got Falcon from the United Arab Emirates. We've got Aleph Alpha from Germany. Lots and lots of different models all over the place. These things, these big, expensive foundation models are popping up all over the place. And then there's this entire ecosystem of thousands and thousands of little startups and projects and products that's also kind of popping up. Most of this is in the last year and a half or two. And so there's this ecosystem that's developing using this functionality. Okay, so newsrooms, automating newsroom tasks. So using just large language models, say GPT-4, there's lots and lots of newsrooms. As a percentage of all newsrooms, it's pretty small, and as a percentage of the work that is done in those newsrooms, it's still small. But there's real-world examples of newsrooms using these tools for copy editing, for translation and the verification of translation, for assisted fact-checking, for summarization, that's a very popular one, for generating text alerts, for generating headlines, for generating newsletters, for generating social media posts, for tagging with metadata, for doing search engine optimization, for rewriting texts for different audiences, for example, younger audiences, or even for taking texts and rewriting them as scripts for audio and video production. So these kind of tasks, and there's many more, these are kind of back-end tasks that are already, only after a year after ChatGPT, not that uncommon globally in the news ecosystem. So the capabilities, these capabilities are actually really, really profound when you start to dig into what they're actually doing. So here's an example that illustrates that. So here's an article. This is from RTVE, the public service broadcaster in Spain. It's in Spanish. Here's one in English about a report from the World Meteorological Organization. And here's a third article from the BBC about flamingos in a lagoon in Spain that's drying up because of drought. So I've got three completely separate articles. And using GPT-4, I can combine those into a single article. So it's worth thinking of like just what's going on here. What this has actually done is separate the articles themselves from the semantic information inside the article. And it's done that automatically. So I'll just repeat that. It's automatically separated the artifact, the article, works with video too, the article and the information that the article communicates. It's pulled those apart. And this isn't just happening in kind of little examples like that. It's happening out on the internet. These are some examples of what's called generative search. This is from Microsoft on the right. This is from Perplexity AI up on the left. Google have the same kind of thing. And what these are doing, these are search experiences where essentially those input texts, those input articles and videos, those are being used as raw material to deliver this ephemeral, just for you response to your question. This text is generated from these sources just once, just for you, just in response to what you've asked for, and then it goes away. It's this ephemeral experience that is using the underlying texts as raw material. That's generative search. So this concept of kind of separating the artifacts from the information inside of them, That's not a theoretical thing. That's happening right now with big companies. So another big profound capability is the ability to take articles and turn them into all kinds of different media, to turn them into comics and social media posts and text alerts, audio.
Temperatures are rising fast across Spain, topping a scorching 45 degrees this week.
Video.
Temperatures are rising fast in Spain, topping a scorching 45 degrees this week and marking this season.
Hey kids,
Animated
guess
video.
what? It's getting super hot in Spain right now. Imagine the highest heat you've
Here's an example that kind of brings a lot of that together. So I've taken these three articles, I've turned them using OpenAI GPT-4 into a single article. Then I've also used GPT-4 to turn that into a script. And then I've used a synthetic voice from a company called 11 Labs to read that script. And then I've used a tool, a text-to-video tool called Runway to turn it into video. So just to make this clear, I type in a prompt and it produces 4 seconds of B-roll video from scratch. And then I've also composed a little background music for it. I have no music skills whatsoever, but I've just typed a few words into a model, and it's produced this background music. And then I've just put it all together. Let's just play this. This is every single sound, every single pixel, every single word, everything from this is AI generated except for the concepts from the original article.
Temperatures are rising fast across Spain, topping a scorching 45 degrees this week and marking this season's first severe heat wave. This heat isn't just turning up the thermostat, though. It's also casting a shadow across Europe, which has been warming at double the global average pace since the 1980s, according to the World Meteorological Organization. Meanwhile, the flamingos at Spain's cherished Fuente de Piedra wetlands are also feeling the heat. A relentless drought has forced them to pack up and search for a new home.
So literally all of that, except for the original, call it reporting, or the original information that came from those articles, all of it came from AI models. Okay, what happens when news consumers, start to control their own consumption experience? Here's an app called Artifact. This has got hundreds of millions of dollars in funding from the people that built Instagram. The founders of Instagram are doing this. And so it's an app, it's an aggregator app. Here's an article, I've selected this article. There's a little button up there, a little AI button, that little star. I can select the AI button and it generates a summary of the article for me. So the news producer did not produce that summary, that's generated for me. If I don't want a summary, if I want something else, I can choose whether I want a simplification, an emoji version of the story, a poetic version of the story, or a Gen Z version of the story. So I can choose how I want, as a consumer, how I want to consume that story. If I want to listen to it instead of reading it, I can push that little button down there and it will read it to me, but I get to choose who reads it to me. I can pick celebrities like Snoop Dogg. So as a consumer, I am controlling how I consume the article. I don't care what the journalist wrote or what the news producer produced. Don't care. I can decide how, as a consumer, how I want to consume the article. That's a very profound capability. Here's another example. On the right there, these little stars are kind of starting to be the go-to icon for AI options. This is from Rappler in Philippines who are using this. Here's an example of a browser plugin. So here's a BBC website in a Chrome browser with a browser plugin. And the browser plugin will when you hit an article, it will open up the article, it will read it, it will summarize it. And there we go, and it summarizes it, and then it will turn it into synthetic voice, and it will read the synthetic voice, and that's
the US military
automatic.
Is unsure what
the BBC had nothing to do with that. Here's an example of conversation, a conversational experience. This is a company called Inflection.ai, and this is their tool called Pi. And so you can just ask it to give it a summary of the news, and it will read you the news. It's kind of bad sound here.
Charles III giving his first speech as monarch. Rescuers in India working
to free
very good
41 synthetic voice.
Workers trapped in a tunnel.
And then you can
President
interrupt
Biden urging Israel to protect civilians if a ceasefire with Palestine ends.
So you want to tell me more about a story, you can interrupt it, and it will stop, and it will tell you more about what you've asked for.
Quite an ordeal.
So you can have it's a little clunky because it's a little slow, the reaction back and forth is a little slow, but you can have a full conversation with this about current news. Okay, so these are big, profound capabilities. And so here's a hypothesis that I'm going to make as a result of those capabilities, that these capabilities are just too dramatic for the current information ecosystem, all of it, to survive in its current form. It's just, you know, it's a matter of time before the information ecosystem changes because of this. This is my hypothesis here, that if we have ubiquitous AI, at some point, it's going to be a very different information ecosystem. Don't know what that's going to look like, but it's going to be different. And so we can kind of just get into that a little bit to finish up here with looking at like what if some of these capabilities are extended to the limit or extended into the future. So what if we have infinite reporters, right? So what if every piece of text, every piece of spoken, digitally accessible spoken or videoed work, or what if every piece of video, everything that's available digitally is available to an AI and can be read and understood and digested and analyzed and summarized and synthesized by an AI. You know, AIs for news gathering. And what happens if that can be used to produce a very specific news experience just for you? What happens if that happens at scale, where individuals have infinite reporters, roughly? That's I mean, again, I'm taking this to the limit here, but this is an extension of what's happening with generative search. What happens if a platform does this? And this is what X and X.AI, this is what they're trying to do here. I don't think they're going to succeed. So far, they're not doing very well, but that's what they're trying to do. Like, that's what the intent is there. What happens if we lose a permanent record of news? So this is the situation that we're in now and have been for hundreds of years. There's lots of sources. The journalists go out and they talk to sources and read the sources. They create a single record of that, a news artifact, an article or a video, whatever, which is archived, and then the consumers are consuming that artifact. This is the way it is now. What happens if it's like this, where the AI is basically taking all of these sources and it's creating these ephemeral, on-the-fly experiences like generative search, specifically for consumers? What happens in that situation? You know, what happens, you know, if everything that news consumer as a consumer is personal and ephemeral, what do you archive? Like, what do you put in a database? Do you put the source material in a database? Do you put the model itself in a database? Do you take every single ephemeral experience, every search result, basically, or the equivalent, and put that in a database? What's the permanent record? So, you know, that's a real possibility here, I think. In that environment, what should a newsroom produce? You know, what's the product of a newsroom in that environment? What happens if the entire value chain of news breaks down? Like right now, the value chain is news gathering, you know, creating the artifacts, the articles, the videos. It's some distribution shared with the platforms, of course, but distribution, and then the content consumption. All of this is controlled by the news organization right now, from end to end. What happens if that all kind of dissolves? You know, consumers start to control their own consumption experience. Distributors start to control content experiences. Lots and lots of individuals or very small teams can produce very, very high quality content, or news gathering originates from networks at vast, vast scales. What happens to the value chain for news? So this is my last slide. I'm just going to make a few suggestions here for preparing for this uncertain future. I'm as uncertain about it as you all are. There are certainly no obvious answers here. This is what I'd suggest. I would suggest engaging with these tools, like really seriously using the tools. This is not something you can just read about and understand. There are no kind of books or best practices. You have to get your hands dirty. It's very much like journalism itself. You have to do it. So I would suggest engaging some more with these tools. I think there's a lot of focus, and rightly so, right now on efficiencies, how to make the existing process of news more efficient. But I think we should also start to turn our attention to the long-term implications of these technologies on the information ecosystem. And to do that, I think we have to be ready to re-examine the very fundamental elements of news, what news in a civic society actually is and how it works, and re-examine that for this new era that we're heading into. There we go.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Did you like it? Infinite reporters. Lot of fun. Garance Burke from AP. She's coming on the stage right now. Please have a seat. She's working at AP, Associated Press, in the US, and she will talk about a new chapter of style books.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Such a pleasure to be here. All right. So today I'm going to talk about two things with you, getting very practical, as AP is known for. We're going to talk about a new chapter that I recently led the writing on of the AP Style book, offering best practices for covering AI. And I'll also talk to you about some of the reporting that I've led at AP investigating AI over the last couple of years. We're really at an inflection point for AI, where both the public and policymakers have a great number of questions, concerns, and excitement about the technology. And from my perspective, this offers us as journalists a real opportunity to dig into the tools ourselves, both in using them and explaining them to the public and ultimately investigating them. So AP, I'm sure as you know, is a global not-for-profit cooperative, which gives us a wonderful opportunity to get news to about half the world's population every day. And so I'm going to offer you some hands-on examples of the way we've approached reporting on AI. So I'm from San Francisco, where AI, to some extent, is actually a local story. And every day I'm surrounded by billboards that say, you know, AI is going to revolutionize all aspects of our lives, right? And in 2020, I had an inaugural fellowship at Stanford University in the Human-Centered AI Institute, as well as the John S. Knight Journalism's Fellowship, where I was able to take some time to really boost my own data science and take classes in R and Python and think about these models and how they are already being applied in all sorts of public policy realms, from immigration to healthcare to the criminal justice system. And certainly these models have the opportunity to solve some deep societal problems, but if misapplied, they can also deepen historical discrimination. They can encode inequalities and further disinformation, which of course, looking to 2024 is something I'm sure we're all concerned about. So our job, as I see it, is really to get to the facts of what's happening on the ground and how these AI technologies are transforming our societies, and how we as journalists explain them really has such an impactful promise right now, when regulations are barely beginning to catch up with the technologies. And how we visualize and go deeper into these technologies can really impact policy. So I offer that to you as motivation. Now, since 1953, the Associated Press has published the AP Style book, which is used around the world as a reference in newsrooms, corporations, and classrooms. Maybe you've consulted it before on grammar questions or ethics questions, how to deal with anonymous sources, etc. It's very widely used, and people get heated about the decisions we make, whether it's having to do with the Oxford comma or how we offer guidance to cover race or gender. And I had the opportunity to lead the writing on this AI chapter. I really saw a need to update the style book with best practices as AI went from being sort of a niche beat to being something we all both use and need to cover. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this guidance. What you'll see on this slide here is just the beginning of the core best practices. The aim is to offer simple language that avoids unnecessary complexity. When you're writing about data science, it can get very esoteric quickly. And we wrote this for a general global audience. Now, we were guided by academic experts and practitioners in writing this chapter. We went through a really rigorous consultative process, and then it was edited by a core team of AP editors and reporters. And this chapter was just published in August. The style book online can be updated year-round as necessary. And I think particularly as AI changes, we're going to need to make sure that our guidance is in accord with how the technologies are evolving as well. We've been doing some trainings on this throughout the industry, and it also fits in to some degree with AP's work on the business side, where the Associated Press has been working with local newsrooms with ideas about how to implement these technologies to further news production and gain more efficiencies. So I'll elaborate now. With this slide, my main goal here is to have us as journalists come out of this esoteric debate about whether AI is good or bad and get back to our reporterly basics, the who, what, where, when, why, essentially. So how these systems work is something that we alone are able to dig deeper on. Understanding where they're deployed is key. How well do these models actually perform, regardless of the political, public policy, or business use case in which they're deployed? Are they regulated? Who's benefiting and making money? This is a classic question. And then, of course, which communities may be negatively impacted by these tools? So an example where we go further into this is to focus reporting on communities that may be negatively affected, particularly by surveillance and predictive technologies, which are some of the ways in which we've seen AI models rolled out in recent years, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have some basic AI entries just to ensure that we're all on the same playing field when we're talking about what these terms mean. This itself can be controversial, so you can see some summaries of the entries that we came up with. You'll note that none of these entries say that these tools are capable of replicating what we do as humans. I think it's really important to focus on the fact that humans build these tools, deploy them, and are impacted by them, which gives us multiple points of entry as journalists to try to understand exactly how it is that they work. So you'll see here AI at its base, computer systems, software processes that can emulate aspects of our human work and cognition. Algorithms, when you're just beginning to cover these issues, you might want to think about it as being essentially a checklist or a recipe. You give a computer a list of tasks, it completes them. And large language models I'll talk a bit more about. Essentially, as David said, are learning patterns from huge troves of material, often online, and then predicting based on the patterns that they find. So you'll see here's one of the longer entries that we did in the style book AI chapter, looking at generative AI, which is, of course, what has brought so many of us to this coverage area. You'll note here that we say that these systems are not producing facts, per se, which is important for those of us who care about fact-based independent journalism, but rather they are known for producing falsehoods at times, and they are predicting the next words, what might be a plausible image from data that these models have hoovered up. So it's important to keep ourselves grounded when we speak about generative AI so that we can think as journalists, where are the opportunities to really understand these models from the inside. So now that we've talked about some of the applications of AI, let's go into some of the work that we've done with our team, looking at how you might put into practice some of this guidance in the style book. And as Jelani was saying, these systems are not going to investigate themselves. AI isn't going to meet a source in a garage to learn how the model works. So that's where we really have a wonderful opportunity. So in the last 2 years, I have worked with more than 40 AP staffers across formats, from video, photo, digital presentation to print, on this series called Tracked, looking at the impacts of predictive and surveillance tools in our communities across the globe. We've told global, national, and local stories, and have also applied some data science techniques in our work. I'm certainly a fan of using AI in our investigative reporting as well as investigating it. So I think, again, my intent here is to get us out of this binary thinking about whether it's good or bad, but rather to get us all familiar and comfortable with understanding these models. So one story that we did towards the end of last year involved reporting on AI tools used in Israel, India, China, and even a little here in France about Marseille's experiment with their big data for public tranquility system. So we looked at how in the pandemic's early days, governments around the world got a fire hose of individuals' intimate private health details, photographs that captured our facial measurements and our home addresses to power surveillance tools that authorities told us would help stop the spread of the pandemic. But instead, we found that authorities actually use these technologies and data to halt travel for activists and ordinary people, harass marginalized communities, and link people's health data to other surveillance and law enforcement records. And in some cases, this data was actually shared with spy agencies. So for over a year, we pored over documents and interviewed sources. And I'll show you a brief clip of the video that we produced as a part of this story as well, so you can see how we went about showing what is not necessarily meant to be seen. The city of Hyderabad, India, has become a hotbed of surveillance technology that's only expanded during the COVID-19 pandemic. SQ Masood was heading home when police pulled him over last year. An officer took his photo with a special app, but never said why.
फेशियल रिकग्निशन टेक्नोलॉजी हो या सीसीटीवी कैमरों का जो नेट बिछाया है इन लोगों ने शहर में, ये सारे जो टेक्निकल सॉल्यूशंस जो पुलिस या गवर्नमेंट यूज़ कर रही है, ये बहुत ही मतलब डरावनी होती है आम लोगों के लिए.
An Associated Press investigation found that during the pandemic, law enforcement around the world greatly expanded their surveillance arsenal. Tools to help stop the spread of the virus instead have been repurposed.
This is, for us, something that is unacceptable in a democracy. So I'll tell you also about another series of stories that we did looking at algorithms used in the child welfare space. There we are. So with this particular set of stories, we were interested in how AI-powered tools were taking data about children and families, both in the United States and in several other countries. We know in the United Kingdom and in South Korea, these types of algorithms have been explored in the child welfare space to decide which children should be taken from their families and placed in foster care. This is obviously a high-stakes decision. Child welfare agencies have a lot that they are dealing with making these sorts of ethical concerns, and some folks felt data-driven applications could help with this. However, what we found is that there were some real concerns in a particular county in Pennsylvania called Allegheny County, where we had heard that these tools were hardening racial biases into the child welfare system. So our first story looked at a Carnegie Mellon University team's research, which showed that in the first years of operation there, the algorithm showed a pattern of flagging a disproportionate number of Black children for a mandatory neglect investigation when compared with white children. And then we followed up with this second investigation you see here that was centered on parents with disabilities concerns, that the tool was singling them out as well. So very briefly, as part of our reporting, we really wanted to bring the public in to understand how these tools work. This is the algorithm itself. It calculates a risk score from 1 to 20. The higher the number, the greater the risk. And it draws from a whole range of data, from jail and probation records to Medicaid to birth records, mental health records, to calculate the score. County officials told us that social workers are always involved and can override the tool, and they said that the Carnegie Mellon University team's research was hypothetical because it looked at what the algorithm recommended on its own. But still, because we centered our storytelling in the humans who were concerned about this AI tool and the impacts it had, family lawyers trying to battle against something that they weren't allowed information about, a former therapist who quit because she was so concerned about this tool, the story hit harder, and we saw that we had almost immediate impact with our work. The state of Oregon stopped using a related algorithm, and the White House highlighted our findings, some of them, in the first AI Bill of Rights. In the second story, we worked with researchers from the ACLU who had also dug deeper into the data and looked at concerns that the algorithm was flagging people who had accessed county services for mental health and other behavioral health programs, and that could actually add up to 3 points to the person's risk score. We also got some of the weights and variables that David was talking about, and were able to see how the county in the past had used a whole variety of different data points that seem somewhat controversial to measure people's risk score, including whether women had smoked before they were pregnant, economic status, family size, of course, certainly previous child abuse complaints. But more importantly, we found a family, Lauren and Andrew Hackney, who shared their story with us. And later we learned that the U.S. Department of Justice had opened up a federal civil rights investigation and was interviewing the Hackneys following our work. If we can just play this briefly here.
Who's taking you down today, moms or dads?
Probably me.
Dad? He's like, nope.
If you lose someone you love and you really want them, and it's like she's your world, and like it's basically you feel like you lose everything. It was getting to the point that she refused to eat for a few hours, to an hour, to 30 minutes, to every minute. So every minute we tried to feed her.
And so then we took her to the pediatrician and tried to figure out what was going on there. But they told us take her to Children's Hospital. Yeah, we tried the best we can to figure out what was wrong. They had to take her away from us right there and then, and we were just heartbroken, we were just sad, and you know that his mom, Andrew's mom, she was crying because she sat in a chair and talked to them, and she was, you know, crying. She was in tears, and Andrew was in tears, and his sister, she was in tears.
And so finally, I'll talk to you about a very brief piece that a colleague and I did recently examining generative AI models. This was a fascinating quick hit story, so I want to posit here that not all investigations of AI tools need to be months-long investigations. Rather, we came across a team at Stanford who had been leading a really interesting assessment of chatbots. They were looking at concerns that chatbots can amplify racist tropes in medicine. And so this slide shows a recently published academic paper of this team who prompted chatbots to answer their medical questions about kidney function, lung capacity, and skin thickness. And what they found in the ways in which they prompted these chatbots with their queries was that the chatbots, you know, everyone from ChatGPT to Bard and across the gamut, the chatbots were drawing on some now discredited medical ideas that there are health differences between races to formulate their answers. And these chatbots spat out answers that perpetuated some racist, debunked medical ideas, prompting concerns that these tools could worsen health disparities for Black patients. So in this particular case, we got exclusive access to this study early, and were able to gain a real deep understanding of the ways in which these prompt engineering opportunities could help us deepen our own investigations of chatbots down the line. So I'll just end here by saying that testing out these AI technologies, as well as using them in our work and applying all of our journalistic methodologies, is really urgent, especially when some of these models are so complex that those who are writing the code can't quite explain them. We really hope that together we can increase transparency and boost understanding of how AI systems make decisions. And that in turn makes for a much more informed public. So you can read our work at this link. Very many thanks to our funders at the Pulitzer Center and Stanford's Starling Lab, and to our partners at UC Berkeley's Human Rights Investigations Lab. So please be in touch if you want to talk stories or the style book. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So much to discuss again. Now it's up to you. Eric Hazan is working at McKinsey. He's not a journalist. He's a consultant, and he will talk about the future of the media work.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Okay, so as Alice just said, I don't know if you hear me well. Yeah, all good? More or less. Okay. I'm a senior partner with McKinsey. I'm also one of the leader of the McKinsey Global Institute, which is our economic think tank. And so we've been writing a lot on artificial intelligence in the past years. I mean, first report that we issued was in 2017. Of course, artificial intelligence is a bit older than that, as is that it has been basically designed in the 50s, as you probably heard this morning, by scientists like Marvin Minsky. But at the time, they didn't have neither the computing power nor the digital data or the algorithm. And suddenly, in the past 15 years, it has been accelerating. I was listening to the former panelist, and I think a lot of the things that we've been discussing on, for example, news proliferation or about fake news, all of this, the seeds have been planted in the past, basically revolution around the digital age. So AI has no sense, and maybe we can discuss about the purpose that we want to give it. It's just a tool, and of course, if we don't give it purpose and sense, it will have results that we are not fully comfortable with. So we have a choice. We have a choice, including on work, which will be the main focus of the discussion we will have now. We have a choice. Do we want to basically give superpowers to people? Because really AI will give us superpowers, and I think David, Garance, and Jeloni have showed that very clearly. Or do we want to use this as a pure productivity tool to make people redundant? So that's the discussion that we can potentially have. There are multiple scenarios around that, and by the way, behind these scenarios around work, if you read Daron Osemoglu and Simon Johnson, for example, latest book, or even the books and the articles from Eric Brynjolfsson, who is an economist from Stanford, with whom we are working a lot, you will see that there are several scenarios where we increase inequalities, and there are scenarios where we do share the fruits of the advance of technologies, and where we do accelerate productivity in a good way to create growth and prosperity. So that's a discussion we can have. I can use that, right? Poof. So coming back to what we're talking about, I think it has been presented in different ways, but what generative AI is doing is pretty much what is written on this slide. It generates new content. We've been discussing that a lot, but it also process and analyze unstructured data, you know, including document synthesis, content customization, and so on, and it enhances human-machine interactions, like in call centers, for example. Okay, so that's pretty much what it does. But remember that generative AI is just a small part of AI. When we analyzed in 2017 AI at large, between 2017 and now, investment in AI at large have been multiplied by 4, but investment in generative AI, so the large language models we've been talking about, have been multiplied by 40. So it's just like you put a lot of pressure on a small part of technology, and look, because you put extremely talented people, it gives great results. So the question now is, what can we do with this? But of course, the other parts of AI do give a lot of impressive results, like a bit less interesting for media people, but like optimizing the routing of the trucks in logistics and improving manufacturing and so on. So there are multiple things that AI can do. But if we focus on generative AI as we do today, basically it has 4 types of impacts for companies at large, and then I'll go to knowledge workers and media. Okay. Basically, it has impact on 4 types of functions. This is the main part of the use cases that generative AI basically focuses on. Okay, it's marketing and sales, customer operations, software engineering. We were talking about coding earlier, and R&D. That's pretty much where the main part of the impact is. And when we move, we deep dive on the impact of all of these use cases on knowledge workers. That could be pretty much anyone from consultant, journalist, or even R&D scientist. Basically, the impact is twice the impact that we see on companies at large. So it has more impact, generative AI has more impact on knowledge workers than on other type of jobs. When it creates value, so we basically created 3 types of model. One is about value creation, one is about the impact on work, and the other one is the impact over time. Okay, so global impact, it's broadly the impact of British GDP every year. So if we push AI at the limits of the economy as it is, the global economy, it can create value, which is another United Kingdom every year in terms of value creation. So it's interesting as if we see that like that. In terms of work, it's in theory, 70% of the job of a developed economy could be automated more than 50%. So let me rephrase that. 70% of the job could have 50% of their task automated. So that's in theory. So then the question that comes is, you know, how long will it take? So because we're consultant, we did 3 scenarios, so we've not been extremely courageous on that, but there is one which says 2035, one which says 2045, and one which says 2070. So it's not the right way of analyzing this. There will be companies, including in the media sector, that will be at the forefront of this. And for these companies, a large part of the jobs will be, again, automated more than 50% in the next 15 years. And some other companies, for other companies in other sectors, it will take more time. So let's deep dive on knowledge worker. Oh, the slide is not very good. No. Okay. Anyway, so that's the sectors. So what it says, essentially, is that, and you don't see the bubbles, I'm sorry about that, but what it says essentially is that the sectors that will have the most innovation potentially and the most productivity will be on the top right-hand side, and so media and entertainment is one of the first sector. Of course, everything which is around banking and insurance, software and technology, every industry that has data digitized, basically, is an industry that can accelerate the impact of generative AI. Okay. So before that, there is a Harvard study that has just been done on the impact of GPT or any kind of other language model on basically a knowledge worker at large, and in particular journalist and content producer. what it says is that if you use GPT-4, it increases the speed of content producers by 37%. So you basically reduce the speed of a content producer or a journalist by 37%. And in terms of quality, because this is often the question, it decreased the quality by 20%. So I was talking about superpowers. Imagine that we all have a copilot. Basically, it will increase the speed and increase the accuracy if you use it well. So if we go into even more into the media industry, you see the type of use cases that are the most interesting here. So there is, of course, what we were discussing with David in particular about ideation of content, content creation, but also everything which is around testing the effectiveness of the content. You know, it's, for example, it's penetration online. You could adjust the content to maximize its audience, for example, with many tools. So all this value chain, basically, we could say that there could be an improvement of the accuracy of the main part of the hours needed to produce content. And on the content drafts themselves, just on producing the content, it's even more than the study I was discussing about. It could get to 80% of time saved. So just to say that for publishers including, there is a lot to be done here. So we see again we have a choice. We can use this to increase our added value. We can use this to basically replace basic tasks without increasing our added value. That's pretty much the trade-off, which is the most important here. I will not go back in too much details on what are the risks. It has been covered quite significantly, but you know that a lot of people, including very impressive data scientists, computer scientists, are wondering, as Garance and others were saying, if we should slow this down or if we should accelerate. Actually, it was David who said that. I think the trade-off is more, how do we, it's difficult to slow this, honestly. A pause of 6 months to think this through is maybe useful, but to slow the advance of all this is really difficult. But, and of course, there are many fruits that we can reap from the acceleration of productivity everywhere. What we could and should do is probably understand how we can master negative externalities. As it was said earlier, there are many biases in the database we use, but actually it's also technology that can reduce the biases. There are startups everywhere working on how to reduce biases in large language model and on trying to get basically its result even fairer, more just. So biases in fake news, but also, as I was saying a bit earlier, trying to understand how this power can be used to reduce inequalities instead of enlarging them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. If you have some question for Eric about the future of work, maybe you disagree with what he said, or you don't want it to happen, maybe it's better.
Hello, I'm here. Could you please give us some examples of the startups you just told us about, which are trying to reduce biases in the data?
So I have one in mind, but I could provide more examples separately if you need. One is Fairgen. Fairgen, it's a startup which is working essentially on gender diversity biases, trying to basically correct them in the databases and also in the process of algorithm usage.
Just one question, and after that we will go to the next panel. It's a discussion.
Merci. Good morning. Would you please give an example of a startup that is working to reduce racial or other biases for specific communities beyond gender? Thank you.
So I have not that in mind, but if you give me your details, I will provide that. I have that at the office. I have a few examples. I think the algorithm being used right now to correct gender diversity can be extended. So there are trials. I have a few examples at the office. I don't have that top of mind.
Thank you very much. So let's jump in the French sequences with Rata Jacquemart. Is she here? The students keep her outside of the room. That's it? Okay. Can you bring her back? Sorry for that. Do you want to take a break, maybe? Or rearrange your seats? There are some seats on the front. If you are not comfortable being outside or... So maybe we can have 5 minutes of pause, and after that we come back, because I don't know where she is. Sorry for that. Just 5 minutes of pause and we come back. You have bathroom and everything outside of the room, and in 5 minutes it's okay. It's upstairs, downstairs, and upstairs as well. Thank you. prie de reprendre vos places, s'il vous plaît. Nous allons pouvoir poursuivre. Ça me laisse le temps de faire la petite introduction sur Rata Jacquemart. Elle fait partie des figures de proue de l'intelligence artificielle en France. Moi, c'est vrai que j'ai connu ton nom dans un article publié dans Les Échos en octobre qui s'appelle « Les nouveaux légionnaires de l'IA en France ». Alors, je ne sais pas si tu es une légionnaire, mais son travail, je résume à grands traits, mais elle développe des outils d'intelligence artificielle très utilisés sur les sites de commerce en ligne. On est vraiment dans le monde du retail pour prédire les comportements de clients potentiels. Est-ce qu'ils vont acheter au même prix que tous les autres visiteurs? Est-ce qu'ils vont partir, laisser leur panier vide? Est-ce qu'il faut leur envoyer une promotion exceptionnelle à ce visiteur-là, en particulier parce qu'il se trouve dans telle zone géographique? C'est à peu près les questions qui sont adressées au quotidien par ton entreprise, Differs, dont tu es CEO. Alors c'est vrai qu'à s'écouter, quand on s'est parlé, on s'est dit, bon, c'est peut-être un peu alambiqué, mais si on tirait les fils du retail pour l'adapter effectivement à la presse en ligne. Voilà pourquoi nous l'avons invité aujourd'hui et c'est ce dont on va parler. Alors bonjour Rata Jacquemart.
Bonjour Alice.
Imaginons je suis un site d'information et la rédaction de ce site produit à peu près 100 nouveaux articles ou contenus par jour. Comment je peux savoir quel contenu je peux pousser?
Alors déjà, ça dépend de la capacité de votre site. Si vous arrivez à mettre les différents contenus, donc l'ordre de contenu par utilisateur ou pas. Donc, chez les retailers, par exemple, il n'y a pas tous les e-commerce qui arrivent à faire ça, puisqu'ils disent que la rapidité du site va être diminuée si on a trop de différences ordres de produits par utilisateur. Donc, si votre site arrive à tenir cette personnalisation, tant mieux. Sinon, on peut aller à une granulaire plus large, qui est segmentation de clients. Et dans ce cas-là, vous pourrez avoir l'ordre d'affichage optimal par segment. Et sinon, si vous n'arrivez pas, comme la plupart de sites e-commerce d'ailleurs, c'est le même ordre d'affichage pour tout le monde. C'est-à-dire, par exemple, si je suis Sarah, on est sur sarah.com, j'ai 10 000 produits certes, mais moi ou Alice, on va voir exactement ce pantalon d'abord, suivre pas ce jaquette, etc. Donc là, déjà, ça dépend de quelle granularité vous pourrez aller. Et maintenant, si, imaginons, pour toutes ces granularités différentes, le même sujet, c'est toujours quel ordre qu'on affiche, quel contenu d'abord. Et ce cas d'usage, c'est complètement prédictable, en fait, par l'IA. Donc, vous pouvez prédire, par exemple, le nombre de clics par article. Je ne vais pas aller trop en détail, mais en fait, il faut enlever les biais de la présence de ces articles dans l'historique. Donc, si vous regardez juste, par exemple, si cet article est bien, ou le même article qui ont à peu près le même contenu, était populaire et c'est sûrement le meilleur, c'est pas vrai, en fait. Parce qu'il y a énormément de biais. Pendant le Covid, si tous les articles parlent de Covid, il était en premier, bien sûr, on va penser que c'est l'article de Covid qui marche. Mais en fait, il faut enlever ces biais. Il faut aussi prendre en compte le fait qu'il y a des articles qui étaient en bas de page, qui étaient sur deuxième, troisième page, par exemple. Et avec l'IA, on va pouvoir prendre en compte ces biais et enlever bien pour vraiment pouvoir prédire l'efficacité de l'article sans biais. Donc, ce genre de cas d'usage chez les retailers, chez les e-commerce, dans mon expérience, ça a pu augmenter en moyenne le revenu de 5% chez les clients. Juste voilà, en optimisant leur affichage.
Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est possible de faire la même chose? Donc, vos clients, on a compris, grâce à des outils, ils peuvent augmenter leur chiffre d'affaires en moyenne de 5%. Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est possible de faire la même chose si on est un média et qu'on veut construire, par exemple, une stratégie d'abonnement?
Oui, tout à fait. En fait, dans le retail, notre produit, c'est des produits physiques, c'est des t-shirts, des jaquettes, tout ça. Pour le média, ça va être du coup des articles ou des vidéos, des contenus. Et quand on a monté 5% de revenus, ce qu'on a prédit, c'est le nombre de clics. On n'a même pas pris en compte en fait la marge de chaque article. Et dans votre cas, le média, si on suppose que tous les articles ils sont à peu près la même marge unitaire, disons, ça ne m'étonnera pas du tout que ça donne une augmentation de chiffre d'affaires.
Si on prend des sites d'infos généralistes, pour l'instant, il y a peu d'offres personnalisées. C'est globalement à peu près le même tarif pour tous, à quelques exceptions près.
Ouais.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce modèle? Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il faut des offres personnalisées en fonction du profil du lecteur? Ceux qui ont un pouvoir d'achat clairement, on va dire, diminué, est-ce qu'on les met dans une catégorie à part et on leur propose quelque chose de différenciant par rapport à ceux qui payent depuis 20 ans et renouvellent? Ça pourrait être une des catégories distinctes.
Alors, pour le prix affiché sur le site, je ne pense pas. Il ne faut pas que ça soit trop... Il y a trop de choix.
Visible.
Voilà, il ne faut pas que ça soit visible, en fait. Parce que moi, je vois l'abonnement du média comme les logiciels. Si vous voyez le prix de Slack qui dépend de votre métier, ça va faire bizarre. Donc oui, restons à 3 choix, par exemple. Comme ce que vous faites, mais par contre, les promotions, ça peut être personnalisé. Les coupons que vous allez envoyer à qui va afficher à chaque client par rapport à leur démographique, la fréquence qu'ils sont visités vos sites, etc. Ou même par mail, toutes ces promotions personnalisées, ça peut se faire. Ouais.
Comment on sait si on doit laisser partir un visiteur ? Comment on peut avoir des signaux qui nous disent c'est bon, celui-là je le laisse partir, j'investis pas plus?
Alors c'est un visiteur qui sont quand même loqués ou pas?
Souvent sur les sites d'infos, oui, ils le sont.
D'accord. Ok. Parce que si des visiteurs sont pas loqués, là, ça va être dur à prédire quelque chose. Ça peut, mais le modèle est moins précis. Pour l'utilisateur loqué, disons, je l'appelle quand même client, même si je ne sais pas s'il paye forcément. Dans ce cas-là, on peut prédire ce qu'on appelle Customer Lifetime Value. C'est très, très utilisé partout. C'est pas que en retail, mais aussi en finance, en telco. Ce Customer Lifetime Value, la définition dépend de chaque entreprise, mais en gros, c'est combien d'argent cette personne va générer dans les X prochains mois. 6 mois, 1 an, 3 mois, ça dépend le cycle de vie de votre produit et ça dépend de plein de choses. Et vu que c'est la prédiction, c'est beaucoup plus précis que juste regarder ce que cette personne-là a dépensé dans le passé. Parce qu'on peut avoir plein de clients potentiels qui ne sont pas encore dépensés énormément, mais vu leur tendance, vu leurs caractéristiques, métiers, ou les articles qui sont regardés, démographie, le salaire, toutes les caractéristiques sur la personne que vous avez, ça montre que même si ils ne sont pas trop payés, mais dans X prochains mois, ça va venir beaucoup. Dans ce cas-là, il vaut mieux focuser sur ces clients high potential customer lifetime value prédits. J'ai rien dit, je précise encore prédit. Vous pourrez avoir des clients que peut-être ils sont énormément payés dans le passé, mais en fait, dans la prédiction, vous voyez qu'ils vont dépenser beaucoup moins. Dans ce cas-là, peut-être l'offre va être moins agressive. Vous allez avoir les gens ils n'avaient pas payé, ils n'allaient pas payer non plus. Dans ce cas-là, il vaut mieux laisser tomber et focuser votre ressource, médias, campagne marketing, pas à eux, mais aux autres personnes plus haut potentiel.
Dans vos équipes, vous avez des data scientists. Vous m'avez dit qu'ils restaient en moyenne 1 an et 7 mois dans une entreprise avec des salaires très importants. Comment vous gérez ce genre de turnover? Ce qui n'est pas du tout le cas dans des rédactions. On n'a pas un turnover pareil pour les journalistes, ni les mêmes salaires d'ailleurs, que des data scientists.
Alors, chez nous, il n'y a pas encore trop de départ parce qu'on est assez nouveau. Et ce que j'aimerais remarquer aussi, c'est que c'est 1,7 années. C'est pas trop dans le secteur logiciel. Peut-être parce que les data scientists, ils aiment bien travailler dans le secteur logiciel. Donc, voilà, c'est moins notre cas. Par contre, c'est vrai que les data scientists chez les clients finaux, comme on dit, comme les retail, médias, telco, ils peuvent changer beaucoup d'entreprises. Et comment les garder? Déjà, le salaire, c'est vrai, ça joue énormément. Donc, la technique chez nous, c'est qu'on paye plus que la moyenne du marché, mais on prend le meilleur. On accepte de payer plus cher, mais on Mais voilà, pour garder le meilleur, il n'y a pas de choix. Et c'est vrai, on peut dire, oui, il y a d'autres choses. Il y a le fait qu'il faut que les data scientists, ils ont la responsabilité, qu'ils voient que leur travail soit utile, soit apprécié. Mais en réalité, surtout pour les jeunes, aujourd'hui, génération Z ou même voilà, Y jeunes, on a beaucoup moins d'argent que les générations de nos parents. Donc, tout le monde veut acheter un appart. Donc, je peux parler de tous les 8 techniques non financées, mais acceptons que, oui, il faut les payer un peu plus que la moyenne.
Est-ce qu'il y a une question pour Rata Jacquemart? Très bien, je vous remercie. Merci beaucoup. Merci Rata. Let's go back to English. It's now Charlie Beckett. He's on stage with us in 2 minutes. Thank you, Charlie. We know Charlie is a big friend of the School of Journalism. He worked for LSE, London School of Economics, and he now runs a big program and a festival about AI and news. Thank you.
Shall I use this microphone?
You can use here. You can sit next to.
Great.
And that's yours, right?
That's right. Merci beaucoup, Alice. It's really great to be back here. I remember being here many years ago, and you were doing an introduction to this crazy new social network called Twitter.
Long time ago.
It's a long time ago, yeah. You've heard some fantastic presentations about what AI can do, and we heard from people like Dean Cobb about the broader kind of context here. I'm going to talk about the work that I've been doing at the LSE around AI over the last 5 years. And it follows on, I used to be a journalist, and then I've been at the LSE for about 15 years as a professor there, looking at the future of journalism. And obviously, so much has happened in that time. The internet, social media, etc. And about 5 years ago, I decided that artificial intelligence was a really interesting field that was already having an impact upon journalism. And so we created the Journalism AI project, which is supported by, of course, Google, the Google News Initiative. And it's a global project where we've got 9,000 people subscribed to our newsletter. We work with hundreds of journalists from around the world. Every year they do our courses, but they also do lots of experimental work with us in a collaborative way. And of course we do research. We did a big survey back in 2019 that looked at what newsrooms were doing with AI, but also what they were thinking about it, what they thought the risks were and the opportunities and the future of it. And every year we have a festival of AI where we spend a couple of days online with people talking about what they've been doing with us, what they've been doing with AI, and discussing some of the broader issues. And that's where I've got to rush off to in about an hour, where I'm going to be doing 2 conferences in one day, which is great. The food is better for this one. It's Paris. So all that I'm going to be talking about is going to be based on our recent survey, which was carried out. Oops. This is not the right slide, doesn't matter. It's carried out this summer. So right in the middle of the generative AI turmoil, we decided to talk to a bunch of newsrooms around the world. We spoke to more than 100 of them in more than nearly 50 countries, and it was quite in-depth. And what was clear, not surprisingly, was that the vast majority had been experimenting with generative AI. I find it interesting that 14% haven't. I find that kind of weird. And I'm very confused about the 1% who weren't sure. They didn't know if they had or not. And the way that they're using AI, as we've seen, it's so important to stress that this idea that it's only about magically creating an article is a nonsense. As David and other people have shown, it can work right through the process. And as you see from this, it's increasingly being used right through the whole news process. And there are lots of examples in the report. It's all online. You can go and read it in Spanish if you want. Sorry, no, there's no French version yet. There's lots of examples of quotes from people about what they are doing and what they are thinking. And again, not surprisingly, they're thinking that they're going to be using much more AI, both, if you like, traditional AI, but also sexy generative AI. Perhaps the more important bit of this slide is the different use cases. And remember, we are really talking globally. And I think sometimes, you know, in the West, we can see disinformation as a bit of a kind of political issue, a bit of a kind of messaging issue. In many countries around the world, I've just been to Taiwan, to Korea, to Singapore. Misinformation is an existential issue for some of these countries who are facing severe strategic threats from hostile states and hostile actors. Obviously, they talked about using it for content personalization and adaptation and automation, text summarization. I thought the chatbot use was interesting, the idea of creating new products, partly, though, for your own journalists. Perhaps your own journalists, you can have tools that help them to research and to create, and also using chatbots as a way of trying to understand what your audience are interested in. What are they thinking about? What are the questions that they want answered? David Caswell makes AI seem like a piece of cake, doesn't he? He makes it seem so easy. But of course, in practice, it is very accessible. That's the UX joy, if you like, of ChatGPT, that anybody can put a prompt in. But to use it well in the context of a newsroom, and a newsroom, you know, fast-paced, low resources, huge variability in the tasks they have to carry out, can be problematic. And the people we surveyed said, yes, the biggest issue is resources, money, time, expertise, to actually be able to deal confidently with this new technology. And also other issues, you know, cultural issues, management issues, and of course ethical concerns that means there's friction. If you, I think as Dean Cobb said, if you want to create bad journalism, you can just go ahead. You don't worry about this. But if you want to create good journalism, then you want to proceed, but proceed with caution. My favorite example of the kind of journalism where you don't have to worry at all about this is horoscopes. Because you can't get a horoscope wrong. Apologies for those of you who believe in astrology. So yeah, clearly a strong sense of opportunities here, but also these concerns. And you can see, you know, a lot of these have been mentioned already. These are real concerns about the nature of the technology, the challenge of upholding standards, wider pressures in terms of commercialization, disinformation, of course, and trust, and just the sheer pace of this development. It's 1 year, almost to the day, that ChatGPT has been released. And here we are talking about it as a major change agent in the news industry, just 12 months on. And obviously, especially if you go around the world, journalism was already under the cosh, under political pressure, under economic pressure, under legal pressures, under commercial pressures. And along comes AI, generative AI, and says, hey, I'm going to challenge your whole business model and the way you're working. So obviously, that this is a serious challenge. And people told us about the ethical challenges especially, and by ethical, I mean editorial as well. You know, basic concepts of verification, for example. So I think you can package these risks in three kind of levels. The first level is the general risks that apply to AI wherever it is, whether it's in health, whether it's in retail, security, policing, etc. We're familiar with this problem of discrimination, disinformation, but also legal issues around copyright and regulation. Who is responsible for these technologies and the things that they do? Who owns the data that they are trained upon, for example? But that applies to any sector. Then I think there's these general risks for the news industry as a whole. The first one we're all familiar with, the idea of tech dependency. You know, we thought that platforms like Facebook and ex-Twitter would be great places to go and do network journalism. Then they changed the algorithm. They decide they don't actually like news. And again, for some countries, for some marketplaces, Facebook virtually was the internet. So suddenly if it's not a good place for journalism, then what do? We have to find alternatives. And then there's this big idea of disintermediation. In a way, isn't it incredible? Isn't that wonderful that you can just put a prompt in and you can get your reply? But that raises the question which the internet raised and then social media also raised. If you can get your information and your commentary and analysis and entertainment elsewhere, why would you ever bother to go to a news organization? Who needs journalists anymore if we've got these incredible large language models and algorithms? Obviously, we have an answer to that, but how you answer that is incredibly important. And then, as we mentioned already, the specific journalism risks, things like inaccuracy, the threat to quality, and the threat to the business model. But you know, based on what I've been told by news organizations around the world, I do think I'm really impressed, actually, by how many are experimenting, how many are developing new products, tools, ways of working, and in addition, they're trying to boost their other editorial offers to try and counter some of this competition. So there's a lot of great work going on out there, especially with the people that are working with us at Journalism AI. But there is still this huge danger, I think, of missing out. We don't have to believe all the hype, either this dystopian hype or the optimistic hype either. But this is a very powerful force, and my concern is that news organizations won't get their act together. I repeat what Dean Cobb said. The bad people have got their act together. They're out there, they're using this, they're filling the space. And I think it's really important that responsible journalists do something about it. And part of the good news from our report is that people are finding ways to address some of these ethical concerns. For example, the idea of trying to call on these platforms and these producers of these large language models to be much more transparent. And in return, we must also, as adopters of these technologies, be transparent. Be transparent within your newsroom, talking to each other about what are your fears and hopes, what are you doing with this, and of course, thinking about how transparent you need to be with your audience, with your public, with your members, with your subscribers. And one of the best ways to evolve a strategy for this is to build guidelines. There's some fantastic guidelines. Some are very short and pithy. Some are, very lengthy and detailed. There's some really good examples on our website that you can find. And that's really helpful because it can build the confidence of your journalists and your staff, giving them some sort of guidelines, some guardrails about what they should and shouldn't do. But it also sends a signal to your audience. Hey, we are thinking about this. We are trying to be responsible. Have a look at our guidelines and be reassured. And of course, when you do these guidelines, you're having a conversation. And I think that is so important. This is not a top-down thing. I go into newsrooms which have been told by their management, do not use generative AI. What are the people on the newsroom floor doing? They're using generative AI. As individuals, they'll be using it. They'll be using it to code, incredible efficiencies. They'll be using it perhaps to manipulate graphics and graphic images. They'll be using it to apply text when they have to edit video for social media. They are all using it, and sometimes with incredible efficiency and effectiveness. They're using it for brainstorming ideas, for example. They're using it for transcription and translation and all those other quite mundane, if you like, office tasks. So I think it's really important that newsrooms make sure that happens in a collaborative way. Because say, for example, somebody's coding in the newsroom and they're 80% more efficient, well, if I was the boss, I'd want to know about that because I'd want all my coding people to be benefiting from that. Very much the response has been this idea, we keep hearing the phrase, keeping the human in the loop, making sure that it's the humans, the editorial people, who decide on adopting tools and then reviewing them. You're going to have, you know, Gen AI editors who are aware of the process and review it as well. And some editorial tools will always be AI free. For example, I would suggest, you know, if you have a website, the top story ultimately should be decided by an editor, not by an algorithm. And collaborate. Lots of news industry approaches you can take. You can block LLMs. You can negotiate with the Gen AI companies. We are starting to see industry-wide guidelines like RSF, their Charter for AI. And we're increasingly seeing an increase in AI literacy. You know, people are, there are loads of training courses available, and newsrooms are aware that they've got to deal with it. Just to sort of end on some key opportunities, efficiency, it's easy to say, well, that's just an economic function, but for an industry that's in such economic trouble, that is an opportunity. And we know that economic efficiency gains can be cannibalized. Sometimes that's the sad history of much local news through the world, that when they've made savings, they've done it without investing in their product. We can see there are going to be new tools. They're starting to emerge. I think David and I were saying 2024 is going to be the year that the Gen AI tools really start to kick in. And as I said, some will be quite funky, but most of them will be, I think, more like David showed in his presentation, lots and lots of reformatting. But we are going to see new products like chatbots and so on. And we're going to see lots of new ways for people using some of these technologies to both organize information, but also to filter it. Just for the journalists, never mind for the public. I don't think it's the journalist's job to go out there and clean up the internet, but it's certainly the journalist's job to make sure that the information that they are deploying is verified and proportionate and balanced and so on. And finally, my sort of optimistic endpoint, because Alice knows I'm a relentless optimist. My hope is that this does free up resources for journalists, because here's the business model case as well as the ethical political case for this. If we're going to be in a world where increasingly you're going to be able to do basic formulaic journalism, let's be honest, most of our journalism is relatively functional, relatively basic. That can be done by AI. So if that's, if so much journalism is done like that, what is the journalism that's going to stand out? What is going to make somebody go to you as a journalist or you as a news brand? It's going to be the human element. And by that human element, I mean things like judgment. As Dean Cobb said, AI doesn't make a judgment. It doesn't know anything. It has no morality or value, but it doesn't really have true analytical skills. That's a human ability, and that's really important. But also things like specialist journalism, investigative journalism. AI has no curiosity. It does not have a sense of injustice that needs to be righted, for example. So again, that is what's going to make you stand out as a journalist. And human interest. You care, you feel, and you should do as a journalist. Well, that's going to stand out because the AI can only mimic sentiment. And finally, you can go out and report in the real world. You can go and witness things, whether it's a court case or a conflict or simply somebody's human joy or suffering. You can witness that as a human being and report back to the world, and AI can't do it. So last practical bit for a kind of strategy to approach this, and I think it does have to be strategic. Don't just stumble into this. As a news organization, or as just a journalist, frankly, get the basic information. Obviously, you're at this conference, so you're getting that information. But then broaden AI literacy within your organization. And by that, I don't just mean the ability to understand AI, but agency. What can you do with AI? What are the limits of it? What are the potentials of it? That's what real literacy means. Assign responsibility within your organization, within your own life, frankly. If you're an individual journalist, take responsibility to find out about AI. Partly because you will be using it, you are using it, and you'll be using it more, but also you'll be reporting on a world increasingly driven by, and we saw brilliant reporting by AP earlier in this conference, so important that we understand AI so we can report on our world. And then test, iterate, repeat. This is the version of the test that we saw earlier. Don't just assume you can kind of plug in and play. Think about how it applies to your own work or your own news organization's work and your standards and mission and so on. Drawing up guidelines, as I said, a really helpful thing. And then collaborate and network. When I was a journalist, I didn't even collaborate with my colleagues. If I had a good contact, I would keep it to myself, right? That has all got to change, obviously. And there are so many opportunities to do this now, partly because we're getting more of that tech culture into the news media, where people realize on the exponential benefits of collaboration and sharing instead of trying to invent the wheel all on your own. So collaboration within your organization across the different silos, but also collaborations externally with perhaps other news organizations, or of course with J schools like Sciences Po, or obviously with projects like mine, because together we can try at least to make the most of this technology. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Charlie.
Petit changement de programme. Dans la foulée de ce que vient de dire Charlie, je demande à Bruno Patino, Sylvain Parasi et Marion Soletti de venir sur la scène pour le panel sur l'organisation des rédactions avec l'intégration de l'intelligence artificielle.
C'est pas le sujet
Non,
du panel.
on a fait un titre beaucoup plus large qui est est-ce que l'intelligence artificielle peut améliorer la qualité de l'information?
C'est fou, on change le sujet 2 minutes avant, c'est très compliqué. Écoutez, merci à tous d'être là. En fait, moi je suis ravi, je vais essayer d'animer une table ronde qui ne va pas vraiment avoir besoin d'être animée vu la qualité des intervenants. Mais qui, je trouve, se situe bien dans la continuité et dans la suite de ce qui vient d'être dit par Charlie à l'instant. Donc, Sylvain Parasi, vous êtes sociologue, chercheur au Media Lab de Sciences Po. Marion Soletti, vous êtes directrice de la rédaction de Politico France. Je ne sais pas si je vous vois ou c'est l'habitude, c'est bizarre. On va se tutoyer plutôt puisqu'on se tutoie en réalité. Donc juste pour prendre la suite, on est ensemble pour une grosse demi-heure. On va reparler évidemment de ce dont vient parler Charlie, mais peut-être avec un angle un petit peu différent. Puisqu'on parle tous aujourd'hui de la rupture qu'induit l'émergence, ou en tout cas l'émergence grand public, la généralisation, l'accélération des intelligences artificielles génératives. Là, on va prendre un angle un peu différent. On va se dire, tiens, oui, peut-être qu'il y a une forme de rupture ou d'accélération, mais il y a aussi une forme de continuité dans un moment un peu plus long ou dans un élan un peu plus long. Donc, je vous propose qu'on démarre, comme disait McLuhan, il faut toujours regarder le futur dans un rétroviseur. Hein. Et donc on démarre de façon très McLuhanienne en regardant ce qui nous arrive d'abord dans le rétroviseur et en essayant de se placer un peu en perspective à la fois des usages, depuis combien de temps, et je vais demander à Marion de nous dire depuis combien de temps chez Politico on utilise déjà des outils, on va dire, d'intelligence artificielle, pas forcément générative, en tout cas des outils d'automatisation, donc démarrer par la pratique, puis ensuite Sylvain, qui a écrit un livre remarquable là-dessus, nous remettra ça dans une perspective de, comment dire ça, computerization en français, générale des rédactions. Puis ensuite, on essaiera de voir la façon aujourd'hui dont la pratique rentre à la fois chez Politico, ou les questions qui se posent, et pareil, Sylvain reviendra. Et on terminera sur un point qui a été abordé par Charlie à l'instant, qui est de dire, oui d'accord, tout ça est bien beau, mais asymétrie des situations des différents acteurs, capacités différentes des gros et des petits de mener à bien ce challenge, et est-ce qu'il faut être unis ensemble ou chacun jouer sa partie pour ça? En tout cas, c'est les questions que je poserai. Donc peut-être, Marion, si on démarre, on va dire en regardant dans le rétroviseur, depuis combien de temps on a des outils un peu d'automatisation ou d'IA, non seulement chez Politico, mais dans la rédaction, ce que tu as pu voir et ce que tu as pu expérimenter?
Oui, alors vous m'entendez? Plusieurs années, c'est sûr, puisque effectivement depuis un an, on parle beaucoup d'IA générative, mais nous, on utilise des outils qui correspondent à de l'IA depuis plusieurs années. Alors, de plusieurs ordres, on va dire. Pour ceux qui connaissent mal Politico, on nous connaît surtout pour notre couverture politique, mais on a aussi une couverture des politiques publiques qui est destinée aux professionnels de la politique, au niveau européen notamment. C'est à Bruxelles qu'on est le plus développé. Et là, par exemple, on a développé toute une plateforme de suivi législatif et de données publiques à destination des professionnels donc de la politique, qui scrape tout un tas de documents et de données publiques et qui permet à des professionnels de, par exemple, se créer des alertes sur la publication de documents, sur l'adoption d'amendements législatifs. Donc ça, c'est un processus qui est automatisé et qui est entièrement de la tech et qui est automatique. Un autre exemple qui me vient en tête, j'ai pas révisé toutes mes dates, mais on a depuis assez longtemps, je dirais au moins 3-4 ans, un outil de tagging automatique dans notre CMS, par exemple, qui est basé sur une analyse sémantique des articles et qui suggère des tags qui sont soumis ensuite à vérification d'un relecteur qui contrôle, et ça c'est un point assez important qu'on abordera plus tard, mais aujourd'hui, nous, tous ces outils-là, ils ont une échelle de contrôle humain au sein de la rédaction. Bien sûr, on a expérimenté, comme beaucoup de rédactions multinationales, et nous en particulier, couvrant un marché et une actu qui couvre 28 pays avec un certain nombre de langues différentes. On a expérimenté avec la traduction automatique, avec plus ou moins de bonheur. Voilà, ayant été pour le coup assez au cœur de cette expérimentation.
Plus ou moins de bonheur, un petit détail
parce que moi, ayant testé cette traduction automatique et malgré l'existence d'outils quand même très sophistiqués, moi j'utilise DeepL très régulièrement par exemple.
Arte aussi, hein.
Voilà, mais je trouvais qu'il y avait une hétérogénéité très forte en termes de qualité. C'est-à-dire que parfois, je pouvais rentrer un article et j'avais une traduction qui était honnêtement presque parfaite. Et puis parfois, au contraire, j'avais des contresens totaux. Parce qu'on couvre aussi une matière législative, politique assez technique, assez complexe. Donc les mots comptent dans le jargon européen encore plus pour ceux qui connaissent un petit peu la machine bruxelloise. Et puis nous, en plus, on couvre beaucoup les histoires de géopolitique, de diplomatie. Donc là, un mot peut déclencher une tempête et un coup de fil de l'Élysée dans les 5 minutes. Donc je vous laisse imaginer le type de choses qu'on peut déclencher avec des choses non contrôlées. Voilà, c'est les exemples que j'ai en tête et qu'on a beaucoup utilisé et testé.
Donc effectivement, dans les études et l'étude de la LSI à laquelle il a été fait mention montre bien qu'en gros, toutes les rédactions utilisent depuis de nombreuses années des outils d'automatisation, résultats sportifs, résultats électoraux, météo, tagage, de temps en temps, à la fois dans les 3 domaines que sont la collecte, le traitement et la diffusion de l'info. Sylvain, si on essaye de replacer ça encore une fois dans un contexte non pas d'une année puisqu'on fête l'anniversaire de ChatGPT, mais de plusieurs décennies, comment tu analyses ce moment-là et à la fois ce qui s'est passé, ce que ça a voulu dire et du coup le questionnement que ça provoque?
Oui, merci beaucoup Bruno. Effectivement, moi je suis sociologue, je fais un ensemble aussi, je m'intéresse beaucoup à l'histoire et ça fait un petit moment que je suis un peu ces questions. Et notamment, j'ai essayé de travailler en France et aux États-Unis sur la manière dont des journalistes ont recours au calcul d'abord et parfois à l'automatisation. D'ailleurs, un des résultats moi, qui m'a beaucoup surpris, c'est que finalement, contrairement à ce qu'on croit habituellement, eh bien, l'intérêt pour le calcul dans la production de l'information est en fait historiquement plutôt venu des journalistes eux-mêmes, hein, et pas forcément de la direction ou des mondes informatiques en dehors. Donc ça, c'est une tendance assez générale. Je dirais
Comment tu expliques ça?
Pas parce qu'en fait, une partie relativement tôt, dès les années 80-90, une partie des journalistes voient tout simplement l'arrivée des ordinateurs personnels et se disent qu'avec ces outils-là, on va pouvoir produire l'information autrement. À une époque où il n'y a pas encore de géants de l'informatique qui prétendent produire l'information eux-mêmes, hein, ça c'est vraiment quelque chose qui change totalement à la fin des années 2000. Et donc on a déjà, bon évidemment c'est assez minoritaire, et ce qui est très touchant, c'est que la plupart de ces journalistes à l'époque déploient des trésors d'inventivité et d'imagination pour convaincre les éditeurs et leurs responsables que ça peut être intéressant pour produire l'information. Évidemment, on est dans un monde totalement différent. Je dirais que les grandes évolutions pour moi, si je devais vraiment tailler à la serpe, je dirais que les IA génératives, c'est d'abord une réduction des ressources et du coût d'entrée, hein, pour automatiser la production de l'information. C'est-à-dire qu'en gros, moi je vois ça comme une façon de rendre accessible quand même beaucoup plus facilement des technologies, des pratiques qui étaient jusque-là des pratiques relativement virtuoses dans des endroits relativement d'exception. On peut penser à plein d'endroits. On a cité Associated Press, aux États-Unis, le Los Angeles Times, dès le début des années 2010, commence à automatiser effectivement la production d'un ensemble d'informations. Et je dirais qu'avec ces IA génératives, il y a cette idée que eh bien, un plus grand nombre d'individus, je vois ça un petit peu comme la différence entre la manière dont les équipes de Donald Trump utilisent le micro-ciblage et la façon dont Barack Obama le faisait auparavant et ses équipes. C'est-à-dire que d'un coup, en fait, on a un accès beaucoup plus simple, on a besoin de moins de compétences, voilà, pour accéder à ces outils-là. Je dirais qu'il y a une deuxième grande différence qui est... justement, je le disais, pendant très longtemps, pendant des décennies, les journalistes essayaient d'intéresser leur direction à ces outils-là. Eh bien, c'est un peu l'inverse. C'est-à-dire qu'aujourd'hui, effectivement, on a une lisibilité et on a tout de suite un ensemble d'outils qui peuvent être directement et plus facilement qu'avant intégrés dans une stratégie, dans le management. Et donc, on peut avoir des situations beaucoup plus nettes où eh bien, des rédactions se retrouvent imposées des dispositifs, ou en tout cas, voilà, la question de l'autonomie journalistique est posée avec beaucoup plus de netteté. Je prendrai juste un exemple là-dessus qui me semble assez révélateur. C'est finalement, on oublie un petit peu, mais vous savez, la manière dont on a intégré les métriques d'audience dans les rédactions. Chartbeat, l'arrivée de Chartbeat dans les rédactions. Voilà.
Je crois que c'était le NPDJ numéro 2.
Tout à fait. Mais il ne faut pas l'oublier, en fait, parce qu'il y a une grande continuité entre ces époques-là. Pourquoi? Parce que finalement, ce qu'on a pu voir dans les études, c'est que Chartbeat et tous ces systèmes, en fait, ont été intégrés de manière très différente selon les organisations. Donc, on a des organisations où, en fait, on a protégé l'équipe éditoriale, on a réussi à introduire des barrières ou des espèces de murs de protection entre les considérations marketing et les considérations éditoriales. Il y a d'autres rédactions où les choses se sont mélangées totalement et ça a été beaucoup plus dur. On a tout un gradient vraiment de formes organisationnelles qui ont été trouvées. La différence, c'est que Chartbeat, par exemple, d'une certaine manière, les outils qui arrivent avec l'IA générative donne une extension beaucoup plus forte à ces logiques et à ces dispositifs déjà de prise en compte des métriques d'audience, puisque en fait l'idée c'est qu'avec ces outils génératifs on va pouvoir très rapidement aussi suivre ce qui se passe sur les plateformes, suivre les sujets d'intérêt, rédiger des brouillons très rapides sur un sujet, voilà, qui émerge, et donc on a une espèce d'automatisation et donc de remise en cause un petit peu des compromis qui ont été construits dans chacune des rédactions. Donc je dirais que c'est un peu ces deux grandes évolutions véritablement de diminution du coût d'accès et des ressources nécessaires pour automatiser la production de l'information, et puis vraiment cette dimension comme ça d'intérêt beaucoup plus grand du management et de l'encadrement, là où pendant des décennies, eh bien, la question de l'automatisation ou la question du calcul était posée par les journalistes eux-mêmes dans une certaine autonomie.
Alors, si j'essaye de résumer, et pardon, à très grands traits, à la serpe, peut-être même à la hache, donc tu me pardonneras, mais ce que j'entends, c'est que tu dis en fait, accès plus ample, plus facile à l'automatisation. Donc chaque organisation décide, j'allais dire, du rôle de l'automatisation chez elle. Et tu dis par ailleurs capacité de paramétrage, puisqu'en fin de compte, quand tu dis faire rentrer le calcul, etc., de la part du management ou de la part d'une décision de paramétrage de ce qui est produit. Et alors donc chez Politico, comment on réagit à ça? Si j'ose dire, est-ce qu'on parle, parce que moi je vois aussi, même si je suis censé n'être que le modérateur, on voit bien que dans les organisations, en fait, se posent 3 types de questions. Est-ce que c'est un outil simple et est-ce qu'il faut qu'on l'utilise et comment? Est-ce que c'est un outil complexe et comme il est complexe et qu'il est potentiellement, j'allais dire, en capacité de nous donner un avantage à un moment donné, est-ce que non seulement il faut qu'on maîtrise l'outil, mais il faut qu'on le construise? Et la troisième chose, c'est effectivement Charlie en a parlé, quelles sont les règles d'utilisation de l'outil pour être conforme à la mission qui est la nôtre. Donc, quels sont aujourd'hui, vous, je sais que tu m'as dit avant qu'on fasse cette table ronde, on n'a pas encore rédigé nos guidelines.
On ne les a pas publiés.
Vous les avez
en cours de...
Vous êtes en avance chez Arte, nous on y réfléchit, vous y avez déjà réfléchi, mais vous ne les avez pas encore publiés. Mais grosso modo, comment vous abordez cette question-là?
Alors, pour revenir effectivement un peu un an en arrière, quand ChatGPT est sorti, que tout le monde s'en est un petit peu emparé, nous, il y a eu quand même très rapidement, on va dire, une approche assez volontariste et positive du sujet à l'échelle de la direction d'Axel Springer, hein, notre actionnaire. Donc, on va dire l'impulsion du haut était plutôt favorable, et de dire il faut s'emparer de ces outils, il faut expérimenter, il faut être volontariste parce que sinon on va se faire renverser par la vague, si je résume, qui correspondait quand même plutôt on va dire à l'ambiance interne, je dirais, au sens où Politico s'étant construit sur un côté très entrepreneurial, la volonté d'être innovant et un peu disruptif aussi dans notre approche du journalisme politique en l'espèce, c'est plutôt dans la culture d'entreprise de s'emparer de ces outils. Mais comme dans chaque rédaction, il y a des tendances différentes, avec des gens qui ont tout de suite dit est-ce qu'on peut expérimenter, est-ce qu'on peut faire ci, est-ce qu'on peut faire ça, d'autres qui étaient là, oulala, il faut faire des guidelines tout de suite, voilà. Donc à tous les échelons, et c'est là que je dirais.
Donc en fait, dans l'organisation comme dans les pouvoirs publics, la fameuse division innover ou réguler.
Oui, et je dirais à tous les échelons, c'est-à-dire aussi bien dans les reporters que dans les chefs de service, que dans la direction, il y a quand même des tendances qui varient. Et il y a eu tout de suite la mise en place quand même d'un groupe de personnes qui étaient chargées d'explorer, d'identifier les opportunités et par la suite de rédiger ces fameuses guidelines. Groupe qui était pas seulement éditorial, hein, mais à travers toutes les fonctions de l'entreprise.
Transversal alors, dans l'ensemble de l'entreprise, voilà. Pour les guidelines, transversal, pas seulement la rédaction.
Pour toute la réflexion, pas seulement les guidelines, mais la réflexion sur comment on allait expérimenter. Et sur les derniers mois, c'est construit une approche sur 3 axes, on va dire. Une qui était assez pragmatique, qui était de dire est-ce qu'on peut identifier tout de suite des cas d'utilisation intéressants pour nous et les faciliter, on va dire. Une autre qui était une grande attention portée à la formation et à la sensibilisation en interne, et ça rejoint les points qui étaient exprimés par nos prédécesseurs, l'importance d'embarquer aussi l'organisation là-dedans. Et une troisième qui était un peu sur la formalisation et la rédaction donc, de guidelines sur l'IA. Sur aujourd'hui où on en est, alors avec bien sûr une attention portée au sujet de propriété intellectuelle qui est assez importante et ça qui est au niveau de la direction.
On va en parler juste après, peut-être termine, et après je rebondis sur la propriété intellectuelle.
Et aujourd'hui, donc ces guidelines ne sont pas finalisés, publiés, mais voilà, ce qu'on peut dire aujourd'hui sur l'état des lieux, sur l'usage, je dirais qu'il est quand même encore à l'échelon en grande partie individuelle, c'est-à-dire qu'on encourage les gens à expérimenter. Il y a plein de gens qui, et moi je l'ai déjà fait, qui essayent de dire trouve-moi un bon titre pour ça. Bon, pas de recette miracle encore, j'ai trouvé là-dessus, mais quand même des choses impressionnantes. Mais aujourd'hui, on ne publie rien qui ne soit 100% généré ou édité par de l'intelligence artificielle, c'est-à-dire que...
Donc ce que disait Charlie, c'est-à-dire le facteur humain.
Il y a toujours un contrôle.
Il y a toujours un facteur humain chez vous.
C'est assez important.
Sylvain ?
Oui, non, mais je trouve que le moment est passionnant parce que on a affaire justement à des chartes, à des guidelines qui sont élaborées dans les rédactions et dans les groupes et aussi plus généralement. Je trouve que l'époque c'est vraiment très très intéressant parce que mais ça pose question en même temps. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut trouver les arènes, il faut trouver les moments, il faut trouver des façons de discuter et d'explorer les choses. Je trouve que c'est vraiment c'est-à-dire que c'est exigeant en même temps, parce que ça prend du temps, j'imagine. Ça prend du temps, ça demande aussi de se poser des questions. Finalement, ça renvoie aussi, je trouvais, à la grande définition. Finalement, parfois, c'est pas inutile de se demander, en fait, c'est quoi le journalisme ? Enfin, qu'est-ce que c'est le journalisme ? Et finalement, on dit souvent, bah voilà, c'est collecter, produire, traiter, diffuser l'information, etc. Et on voit bien que cette définition ne fonctionne pas du tout. Enfin, c'est-à-dire que si on retient uniquement cette définition-là...
Elle est automatisable à 100%.
Voilà. Et donc, du coup, ça peut pas être...
Paramétrable à 100%.
Exactement. On est sûr de se faire un peu remplacer. Ou en tout cas, voilà, l'autonomie journalistique n'est pas garantie. Et donc, ça veut dire qu'il faut passer plutôt par d'autres types de fonctions qui sont, par exemple, surveiller les gouvernements, ou bien collecter des faits nouveaux, ou bien, par exemple, évidemment, former des publics, rassembler des publics. Ça, ce sont des tâches, évidemment, qui sont des tâches journalistiques. Et je pense que c'est super intéressant d'aller explorer par rapport à ces grandes fonctions.
Alors, ça me permet de basculer dans la deuxième partie peut-être de la conversation avant d'ouvrir aux questions. C'est que si on reprend la définition du journalisme, une autre, et si on part et là, peut-être raconter aussi les discussions qui a pu avoir lieu à un moment donné lors d'élaboration de chartes, et notamment de la charte de Paris, un peu encadrée par RSF ou d'autres. Et si on part du principe que un fait journalistique, ou plutôt un écrit journalistique, il est forcément vérifié, indépendant, et il engage la responsabilité de son éditeur, la question qui se pose à ce moment-là, c'est que vient faire, quel est le rôle ou quel est l'impact des outils d'IA générative dans, j'allais dire, la responsabilité de ceux qui l'utilisent. Parce que, on l'a dit, il y a la collecte de l'information, ça c'est sur la vérification. Il y a la façon dont on va pouvoir traiter l'information, et donc là, il y a forcément, là c'est le côté indépendant ou désintéressé, et les biais des machines possibles peuvent remettre en cause ce côté un peu désintéressé. Et 3, il y a la publication, diffusion ou propagation, peu importe comment on l'appelle, des informations. Et là, il faut évidemment qu'une organisation puisse engager sa responsabilité. Et donc la question, et encore une fois, il y a eu un débat à un moment donné, est-ce que si un jour on doit produire des choses 100% IA, est-ce que ça engage notre responsabilité ou pas? Et la réponse de la collectivité, c'était évidemment, à partir du moment où c'est chez nous et on publie, intrinsèquement ça engage notre responsabilité, sinon ça n'est plus du journalisme. Si on part de ce principe-là, et pardon de faire des questions un peu longues, j'avais prévenu Alice que je ferais des questions longues, si on part de ce principe-là, sur ces 3 points, quelle est la réflexion, d'abord peut-être Marion et puis ensuite Sylvain, qui est la vôtre, c'est pour répondre positivement à ces 3 points, est-ce que la transparence, ça suffit ? C'est-à-dire la transparence des données d'entraînement pour la collecte, la transparence du mode de fonctionnement de l'outil pour les biais, et la transparence, ce qu'on appelle en aval, pour l'ensemble des utilisateurs, c'est-à-dire je tag, je dis ce truc-là, ce papier, ce reportage, cette image a été fait grâce à l'aide de ou par l'intelligence artificielle. Est-ce que la transparence, ça suffit ? Ou est-ce qu'il faut, au-delà de la transparence, un contrôle réel, c'est-à-dire faire son propre outil pour pouvoir être responsable de son propre outil ?
Alors moi, ma réponse spontanée, c'est que la transparence est nécessaire mais non suffisante.
Ça, c'est un plan à la Sciences Po magnifique, qu'on enseigne dans cette école depuis la création de cette école. Ok.
Non, je pensais plutôt à ma formation mathématique en l'occurrence.
Oui, pareil.
Nécessaire, non suffisante. Voilà.
D'accord.
Donc je pense qu'évidemment, si on se met à publier des contenus qui sont générés par de l'IA, il faut le mentionner, mais ça ne peut pas suffire. C'est-à-dire qu'on voit bien qu'il y a une dissymétrie, et ça s'est joué dans d'autres types de contenus qu'on peut publier en tant que média. Par exemple, je pense au contenu publicitaire et à l'enjeu de la signalisation de ces contenus pour l'audience. On voit bien qu'il y a une asymétrie entre nous, la manière dont on pense être clair sur ces contenus, et la manière dont elle est consommée par l'audience. Et donc, en fait, il faut anticiper cette consommation et dire, c'est pas parce qu'on dit ça a été généré par IA qu'on peut s'en laver les mains et dire non, on est engagé en tant que marque, en tant que journaliste, en tant qu'auteur. Et il faut, aujourd'hui, en l'état actuel des choses, cette étape de contrôle, elle me paraît indispensable.
Donc transparence nécessaire, pas suffisante, un contrôle souhaitable, contrôle à la fois aux 3 niveaux, donc données d'entraînement, structure des structures, j'allais dire, des IA elles-mêmes et la production. Sylvain ?
Oui, je suis assez d'accord.
Est-ce que la rupture, elle est peut-être là, non, par rapport aux outils d'automatisation précédents?
Oui, alors après, c'est toujours la même chose. C'est-à-dire qu'on a des outils d'IA génératifs qui sont extrêmement divers. On utilise finalement une expression pour parler de choses très très différentes. Et puis, c'est la même chose pour le marché de l'information et pour les médias eux-mêmes, hein, qui en fait ont un positionnement de marché qui sont extrêmement divers. Si on essaie de résumer les effets du numérique comme ça à grands traits, vraiment de très loin, on pourrait dire que ça a accentué à la fois un journalisme de répétition, d'accord, de standardisation, ça c'est plus important qu'avant, et en même temps ça a augmenté la qualité d'un ensemble de titres de presse, dont Politico, on peut dire, voilà, ça fait partie de la qualité très grande, en plus grande qu'avant. Donc on a un peu finalement une dualisation un peu. Et de ce point de vue-là, eh bien, on a des formes, des outils ou des services très très différents. Voilà. Et évidemment, selon le positionnement sur le marché et la relation qui s'est construite historiquement avec le public, évidemment, ce pas les mêmes outils, on ne pourra pas les utiliser de la même manière, il faudra faire très très attention. Clairement, un journalisme de qualité, enfin j'exagère un peu, mais en tout cas un journalisme de qualité qui produit une information de qualité distinctive du coup de ce qui se fait, un petit peu comme chez Politico, il y a une volonté de se distinguer de l'offre existante. Clairement, aller utiliser des outils qui vont générer du texte en grande quantité, en grand volume, etc., appuyer sur ce qui apparaît sur les réseaux sociaux comme étant les topics, les trending topics, ça c'est aller dans le mur, évidemment, c'est complètement contre-intuitif. Et donc ce sera plutôt d'autres outils qui demanderont plus de ressources, clairement, plus de compétences. Et on sait très bien que quand on va vers un journalisme vraiment de qualité, distinctif, original, les outils d'IA vont être à la marge, vont renforcer la productivité vraiment à la marge. Et pas forcément de manière absolument déterminante comme pour le grand contenu.
Ça se discute, ça, quand même. Marion?
Alors, non,
sur le fait à la marge, j'entends.
Ça se discute, c'est-à-dire que pour revenir sur la chaîne de valeur des médias et où on peut voir les plus gros impacts, où moi je les vois aujourd'hui en tout cas en tant que Politico, je dirais que dans la production du contenu, et en tout cas nous sur le type d'information à forte valeur ajoutée sur lequel on est, ça reste quand même très humain et manuel. C'est-à-dire nous on est dehors tous les jours, on parle à des sources, on cherche de l'information exclusive, donc ça c'est pas l'IA qui va nous l'apporter. En revanche, sur évidemment les enjeux de production et de distribution, là énorme impact potentiel, parce que pour une raison simpliste de départ, par exemple, qui est que notre audience elle est confrontée comme plein d'audiences à l'information overload, hein, ils reçoivent beaucoup de contenu, ils cherchent les trucs importants pour eux, mais beaucoup. Et donc ça, typiquement, il y a une sélection plus fine, une customisation des canaux de distribution et du type de contenu qu'ils reçoivent. Là, on voit quand même des potentiels importants.
Oui, alors peut-être un dernier point, parce qu'on me dit de terminer bientôt. Justement, si on part de ce principe-là, c'est-à-dire que l'outil, pour qu'il soit utilisé de façon, j'allais dire, la plus journalistique possible, il vaut mieux qu'il soit à minima transparent, donc il y a une négociation possible avec les fabricants d'outils, on va dire, et au mieux contrôlé ou co-construit, ce qu'on voit arriver avec AP ou d'autres qui essayent de construire leurs propres outils aujourd'hui. Deuxième chose, si par rapport à ce que vous dites tous les deux pour mieux gérer l'impact, alors il y a un double impact économique toujours à la fois au niveau du travail, c'est-à-dire substitution ou complémentarité. Donc si on dit c'est un outil de complémentarité, non pas un outil de substitution, et de complémentarité non seulement pour la endline de production, peut-être pour la collecte d'infos. Moi je suis persuadé que pour la collecte d'infos c'est très important pour la détermination des trends et pour la diffusion. Alors, pardon d'être direct, mais tout le monde ne peut pas se le payer. Et comment vous voyez arriver ces choses-là? Je donne un exemple. Imaginons qu'on soit un acteur français, qu'on appelle Sam Altman en disant « Voilà, je suis intéressé par travailler et faire ma propre IA avec vous et co-construire les choses avec vous ». Il est fort probable, et si je dis qu'il est fort probable, c'est que ça a déjà eu lieu, qu'on se verra répondre « Écoutez, je travaille avec AP, ça me suffit, donc je n'ai pas besoin de travailler avec vous ». Comment et pour terminer ça, vous voyez cette perspective, parce que tout le secteur informationnel s'est construit en France sur l'idée de la réduction la plus forte possible des barrières à l'entrée des acteurs. Et le paradoxe par rapport à ce que tu disais, Sylvain, c'est que c'est des outils qui peuvent être utilisés par tout le monde, mais paradoxalement, pour qu'ils soient vraiment journalistiques, tout le monde ne pourra pas se les offrir. Comment vous voyez arriver ce paradoxe-là dans le domaine de la diversité de l'information? Et Alice me dit en 1 minute 30 chacun, pardon. Sylvain peut-être et Marion ensuite.
D'accord, bah très rapidement, effectivement, je suis entièrement d'accord. Les barrières, les asymétries vont être importantes. Moi, il se trouve que j'avais travaillé un petit peu sur la manière dont on utilisait les algorithmes et les données dans la conduite de l'investigation journalistique, donc qui est vraiment le produit le plus virtuose, un petit peu, le plus légitime et le plus valorisé dans le journalisme. Clairement, les outils aident, mais en fait, on a un coût humain qui reste très important. Donc, ce n'est pas seulement l'accès aux outils, c'est les compétences, c'est la capacité à travailler collectivement, à essayer de négocier toujours entre les valeurs journalistiques et la conduite de l'enquête. Et ça, clairement, eh bien, on a des personnes, je pense à Alexandre Leschney, forcément, chez Politico par exemple, mais il y en a d'autres qui ont cette histoire, qui ont ces compétences et qui arrivent à articuler les choses. Donc je dirais que c'est presque plus un coût humain en fait, qu'un coût vraiment d'accès aux technologies directement.
D'accord, mais c'est un coût quand même.
Un coût très important.
Tout le monde ne peut pas forcément se l'offrir. Marion, un dernier mot?
Oui, et là-dessus, pour revenir à ton point d'introduction, je dirais que c'est pas tellement une rupture finalement, puisque cette espèce de changement de paradigme sur les compétences qu'il faut pour être un bon journaliste, il a quand même eu lieu beaucoup sur les dernières années, avec certaines compétences techniques aussi. Et je trouve que là-dessus, l'arrivée des IA génératives, elle a été plutôt... on a vu quand même des interfaces, encore une fois, très simples d'utilisation, très accessibles. Donc je trouve que c'est plutôt presque plus accessible pour certains aspects qu'il y a quelques années. Et après, je peux imaginer, mais voilà, tu as écrit des livres là-dessus, donc c'est plus comme toujours, avec ces choses-là, il va y avoir une phase où ça va être accessible à des gros, où que certains vont s'en emparer, et puis ça va se répandre dans l'écosystème, et ça va devenir une commodité, quoi. Donc je crois pas qu'à ce sujet-là, ce soit plus asymétrique qu'avant, si je peux dire comme ça.
Ben voilà, donc vous avez 3 opinions, j'allais dire, nuancées. En fin de compte, moi, je pense que ça va être une asymétrie forte, très forte entre ceux qui seront capables de construire leurs propres outils et ceux qui ne le seront pas. Mais là où je suis entièrement d'accord avec Marion, c'est qu'en revanche, le paradoxe, et ça avait été déjà évoqué par Charlie, c'est qu'on va être dans un espace informationnel où, j'allais dire, encore plus qu'aujourd'hui, les contenus journalistiques de qualité vont évidemment voisiner avec des contenus automatisés qui auront l'air d'être du journalisme sans en être du journalisme, que ça disrupte évidemment le marché. Merci à tous et surtout merci à Marion et merci à Sylvain.
Merci Bruno, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup Sylvain Parasi, Bruno Patino, Marion Soletti. Now it's Ava Sira. She's a professor of management at NYU, and she will talk about a very good title, I think. Invisible ads and visible thinking. Make your brain work.
Well, thank you all for having me and your attention this morning as we get close to the lunch hour. I know it's hard to stay awake, but hopefully I'll keep you awake. So today I'm going to be talking about advertising, journalism, and ethics, but essentially all I'm going to be talking about is critical thinking and how critical thinking is the most important skill that we could be teaching both in the classroom and in the corporate world. And so in an attempt to start with large language models, let's start with language. And as I show you this image of a woman wearing a ring on her left hand, I love just one word associations. What words come to mind as you see this image? Engaged, wedding, expensive, good answer, that's what I was looking for. So I decided to plug into ChatGPT 3.5, so the free version. Why do women wear diamond rings? And it gave me a few decent answers, right? They're engagement rings. We associate diamond rings with getting married. They're for weddings. There's fashion and style. But then I also plugged in some articles to ChatGPT, articles about how advertising played a role in the way diamonds have their perceived value, right? Because these are just rocks. And so then I switched to the paid version. I wanted to see, hey, if you can afford to pay for ChatGPT, what different answers would you get when you ask, why do women wear diamond rings? And so then you start to see, you know, beyond style and fashion and status, right? It could be a status symbol. You see these answers like marketing, how to roll in it. But it's really not telling me much more than A.W. Ayer, an ad agency in the 50s, got paid to run an advertising campaign for De Beers. But it's really journalism and journalists that kind of educated us, or hopefully some of us, about how advertising played a huge role in the fact that we view and associate any value with diamond rings. Essentially, De Beers had an entire warehouse filled with rings coming out of the Great Depression and World War II, and no one wanted to buy them. Why would I spend money on a rock when I'm trying to figure out how to feed myself? But of course, these warehouses are filled. We're trying to create value from diamonds. So how do we do this, right? Saying that we ran an advertising campaign isn't actually telling me all that much. I could run an advertising campaign. That doesn't mean that it's going to be successful. So it's through reading these works of journalism and them going into the archives and going back into finding out that we had a female copywriter try to associate diamond rings with getting married. And, you know, diamonds last forever. Hopefully so will my marriage. So she's writing all of this ad copy late at night in New York, trying to create value out of something that previously was very actually hard to sell. You know, it wasn't always a standard that diamond rings in a room full of people would have elicited a response of being associated to weddings. And furthermore, it's not just an ad campaign. You know, an article by The Atlantic showcases that they hired celebrities to make sure that they were wearing diamond rings, and these people that we really looked up to could endorse the fact that wearing a diamond would be of value and would be associated with getting married. And you know, this idea of the 4 C's, cut, clarity, carrot, etc., that was advertising copy. We read it now as information, right? If you're in the market to buy a diamond ring, you would consider those 4 C's. But that was just advertising copy that ran in advertorials. So, you know, articles or ads that kind of looked like articles in the early 50s into the 60s. And now it's become so much a part of our vernacular, correct? And you see this intersection between commerce and culture, right? Commerce being, how do I sell a rock? And culture being, this rock is associated with getting married. And you continue to see this marriage between commerce and culture even today. So if you peruse the New York Times street style section, you'll see Tokyo fashion and, you know, what people are wearing around the world to express themselves. But as you click through into some of this content, much like an Instagram story, or I guess meta story, you'll see that it says journalism by the New York Times, and it would say video recorded on Google Pixel. Okay, so the video was recorded on Google, and much smaller text, you'll see Google supported the street style column. And I think supported is a really interesting word because we see news publications like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times say to their readers, please support us, right? Please pay for a subscription and support the great work we do. So I'm left feeling a little bit confused about if Google was supporting them the same way that readers and paying subscribers did, or if this is, in fact, an ad. And so back in 2015, when the New York Times launched their branded content studio, T-Brand Studio, I actually happened to work with them as one of their early hires. I thought, why not apply my advertising skill set to helping journalists? So I happened to follow the New York Times advertising section on my personal LinkedIn. And it's only through scrolling that feed, right, that's targeted towards people that are in advertising and have some relation to the New York Times, that I see that actually Google is supported and is keeping on expanding the style section in the paper. And then you'll see in really small text that it does say advertising as you scroll through the site, but it's very much grayed out, right? It's not that obvious. And a lot of peer-reviewed research actually shows that 30% of people miss these labels entirely. And actually 1 in 5 people, when they're asked to engage with things like native ads, will actually identify it as an ad. So for the majority of people, you can come across a piece of branded content or advertising, and it might as well be invisible to you and read as real content because you're missing these labels, right, given the architecture of these sites. And it's a very tricky thing to regulate. So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the US, has regulations certainly about ads should be labeled as such, but they're very reactive, right? So if they see publishers maybe not identifying content correctly as an advertising, they won't go after them. They'll wait for consumers to complain. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I think it can be hard to write an email to the FTC and hope that you get a response. There aren't a lot of people that are doing that great work. But in fact, what the FTC did come down on this past summer is influencer advertising, right? If for any of you that are on social apps, hopefully not this morning, you might have come across some influencers trying to push their products, and they're not always labeled as ads, and it's extremely hard to regulate. But the FTC has realized, hey, this is a big issue, and you know, furthermore, beyond just the previous side where it's talking about please have disclosures, for influencers, it's taking it a step further, and it's saying that these disclosures actually have to be present high up in the bio, high up when you're scrolling. You don't have to click on it to then see an ad, because it's realizing this is actually a huge issue for consumers who are buying products, not realizing that someone is actually being paid to promote them. And what makes this even more complicated is that if an influencer is working with a news publication to promote a certain product, it's not the news publisher that's held liable or held accountable for this information. It's actually the ad agency or the company that's running these ads. So publishers are kind of excused from this behavior. And you know, in the previous article, I shared about the great work that journalists do. I'm not sure if you caught that there was actually a native ad right under editors' picks. So ostensibly, editors have chosen for you to read about a Japanese whiskey brand. But it's very easy to miss these things, right? It runs right alongside great news, things that can really educate us about the world. So as we start to think about large language models and how do we know real information from information that has commercial interest, just because it's so hard for humans often to figure out what is commercial from what is real editorial content, this poses a big threat to language models. How are they gathering inputs from across the web to better inform us when we ask questions? It can be very difficult for these models to realize what's the difference between commercial information and real editorial information. And you know, part of what I appreciated when the provost gave the opening remarks today is I think we have to understand that people who are being trained in journalism and media studies are not always getting hired as reporters, right? So you're seeing a majority of jobs actually emphasize skills that are marketing and advertising skills when you go out into the journalism job market. And I'm not sure how exactly it plays out in France, but in the US, jobs that have more to do with marketing or advertising and are in publishing worlds actually pay a lot more. So if you're a student that's coming out of a lot of debt, you realize, oh, if I actually sell ad space for the New York Times or sell branded content, maybe that'll help me pay down the debt that I've incurred getting this great education. And part of the issue here, so I've just pulled some job descriptions from the past 2 weeks. This isn't old at all. And you'll see there are things like Director of Communications. How am I managing my audience insights? What are people clicking on? Is there more of that content being produced? And this isn't just the New York Times, right? We're seeing this across the Financial Times and the Guardian. It's a prevalent trend, you know, in global markets, not just in the US. And so, you know, this leaves me with a quandary of the problems that I'm presenting here really cut across 3 different industries, and I apologize for the formatting here, but it's cutting across academia. When we're dealing with things like large language models, so much of what we have to teach is what's going on today in the newsroom and what's going on today in publishing. And part of the issue I think that academics have is maybe they haven't been in the field as much as they want to be, and they haven't been writing or working in these newsrooms dealing with these pressures. So are they properly equipped to update their ethics syllabi and teach us about some of the problems we might have in our first year working in a newsroom? Are they showing us relevant case studies? And I think this is a huge opportunity. You know, often we ask alumni for money and we say, hey, like, please give back to this university that's helped you accomplish these great things in your career. But actually, there's a huge opportunity to just ask for 20 minutes of their time and say, what are the skills you wish you learned in the newsroom? Can you tell me about some challenges you've been having at work? And this doesn't even need to be something that's as cumbersome as a survey that they fill out. It could be as simple as, hey, can you just record some thoughts you've had working in the past month? How has AI affected your job? And then how do we collate that information? And again, not change the way that we're educating people in school, but just use these case studies as supplements to lesson plans that already exist, right? Ethics has always been an ongoing conversation, and I think the core ethics principles of journalism, when it's transparency and independence, still hold, but the way that it gets expressed with digital media, and certainly in the age of AI, needs to be addressed at rapid speed, just as these technologies are growing and we're finding new ways to implement them, right? And the other thing is corporations aren't something that we have to be afraid of. So much of the work that we do in school gets applied right away in our first year of the job, where we have managers that say, it would have been so helpful if you knew X, Y, and Z on day one. Shouldn't we be liaisoning with corporations, asking them, what do you wish journalism students were learning? What is there a scale appetite for as you start to apply these new technologies to your newsroom? And that's another way, again, to keep academics, students, faculty up to date with trends that are happening, so we don't feel like we have to be so reactive to things that are going on. And we can also give more thought to how to incorporate these technologies into the workplace. Lastly, publishers. I've said so much about how sometimes these ads aren't labeled properly, but I think there's also a huge opportunities for publishers to say, yes, we do still value transparency and independence, and in fact, we have maybe an additional paid tier where if you pay a higher rate, we get rid of all of this ad space. But just as they educate us about the world, I think it's also fair for them to say, we have new business priorities and values, and it's hard for us to be a completely ad-free service, whether you're paying for it at the current subscription that's offered or if it's for free. But I generally feel, both with corporations and news publishing, that transparency is going to only become more important as we start to view these technologies as somewhat of a black box, and we want to figure out how we can be more transparent about their use and what it means for us as readers, educators, and students. Hopefully I didn't go through that too quickly, but I'd love to take some questions if you have any.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Maintenant, les étudiants de M2, je vous prie d'accueillir bien chaleureusement, parce que c'est la première fois qu'ils montent sur la scène des NPDJ. Florine Sylvain et Raphaël, alors j'arrive jamais à le prononcer et je m'en excuse. Voilà, Marine Valdir.
le prononce très bien.
Voilà. Vous avez travaillé donc dans un atelier sur les podcasts, sur les grandes innovations technologiques, et voilà le résultat.
Exactement. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. On va vous présenter le podcast que nous avons produit, les 16 étudiants de la spécialité son de l'école de journalisme de Sciences Po.
Donc ce projet, c'est le fruit d'un travail de 12 semaines des étudiants. Notre podcast s'appelle « L'enfer est pavé de bonnes inventions ». Et on va tout de suite vous laisser avec le teaser.
Une révolution, une technologie menaçante, un monde d'opportunités. L'intelligence artificielle a fait une entrée fracassante dans nos vies. Lancé il y a 1 an, ChatGPT annonce une ère de changement majeur. Mais ces perspectives divisent. À force de tout déléguer à la machine, sommes-nous en train de perdre notre humanité?
Est-ce pour autant une première dans l'histoire? Nos sociétés ont traversé d'autres révolutions technologiques, connu d'autres innovations qui ont profondément changé notre quotidien. C'est ce que nous allons explorer dans les 7 épisodes de ce podcast. L'enfer est pavé de bonnes inventions.
L'imprimerie, le clonage, le smartphone, Deep Blue, le web et les robots, autant d'exemples qui peuvent nous éclairer face aux doutes que soulève l'intelligence artificielle.
De Gutenberg à ChatGPT, retour sur ces grandes innovations qui ont changé nos vies.
Chez Citroën, on a désormais misé à fond sur la robotique.
L'imprimerie, incontestablement, a répandu la peur.
De vrais espoirs pour les chercheurs, mais aussi de véritables interrogations morales.
Bonjour ChatGPT.
Bonjour Sonia.
Une question centrale, celle de l'Internet civilisé.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Le champion du monde d'échecs vient d'être battu en combat très singulier par une machine.
Donc vous l'avez compris, on est parti de l'intelligence artificielle, la thématique de cette année, et on s'est vite rendu compte que l'IA n'était pas la première technologie à susciter des peurs, des craintes, et que c'est même assez intrinsèque à tout changement, et en particulier au changement technologique, de susciter ce mélange de peur, de crainte, mais aussi de fascination. Et donc on est un peu remonté dans le temps pour raconter l'histoire de ces inventions qui nous ont fait peur et qui pourtant ont terminé par bouleverser nos sociétés, afin de mieux comprendre aussi les réactions qui entourent aujourd'hui le développement de l'intelligence artificielle.
Donc c'est avec l'aide de notre professeur de podcast, Edwige Coupez, qu'on a produit et réalisé de A à Z ce projet, parce que notre idée c'était de mobiliser les talents de chacun. Donc par exemple, Martin Dufaux et Gali Bonin, avec l'aide de Dimitri Borit, qui est à la régie en ce moment même, ont réalisé l'ensemble de la musique de ce podcast. Au début, on a réfléchi tous ensemble, on s'est demandé quel genre de musique on souhaitait et on s'est dit que quelque chose de mystérieux, d'un peu futuriste, mais tout en restant dynamique, ce serait intéressant. Et au final, les garçons ont réussi à créer la musique que vous venez d'entendre dans le générique, mais ils ont également créé l'ensemble des virgules, des tapis et de tous les éléments sonores que vous allez entendre dans les 7 épisodes de ce podcast. Martin et Gali, avec l'aide de Marine Séan, juste ici, ont également gérer toute la coordination et la communication autour de ce podcast. Sur un autre thème artistique, Séverine Perron et Alix Champlon se sont chargées de la jaquette de ce podcast, donc c'est l'image que vous avez vue juste avant, mais elles ont aussi réalisé l'ensemble des 7 jaquettes des épisodes en se basant sur les innovations technologiques dont ils traitent. Par exemple, on a une brebis pour le clonage avec la brebis Dolly, le smartphone ou encore une pièce d'échecs pour Deep Blue.
Chaque épisode a été réalisé par un binôme d'étudiants. C'est un mélange d'interviews, de reportages, d'archives, de reconstitutions sonores aussi. Pour vous donner des exemples, par exemple pour le reportage, la partie reportage, on est parti en Loire-Atlantique, près de Nantes, visiter une des plus grandes écuries de France pour rencontrer 2 juments clonés. Donc là, c'est l'épisode sur le clonage. On est aussi allé à Lyon pour visiter le musée de l'imprimerie. On a un binôme qui est parti à Lisieux dans une usine robotisée, ou encore un autre groupe qui est allé au procès fictif de ChatGPT à Paris. Et on a aussi réalisé des interviews, comme avec l'inventeur de l'assistant vocal Siri, avec le créateur de la première page web française. Un binôme a aussi interviewé le manager du champion du monde d'échecs, Garry Kasparov. C'est le premier homme à avoir perdu face à une machine Deep Blue.
Et donc au final, ça nous donne 7 épisodes d'une vingtaine de minutes chacun. Et ils seront très prochainement disponibles sur l'ensemble des réseaux de Sciences Po, donc par exemple Deezer, Spotify ou encore Amazon Music.
Merci.
Bravo à tous les deux et à l'intégralité de votre groupe pour tout ce travail. Un petit coucou amical aussi à Edwige Coupez qui a assuré l'enseignement et la coordination de toute cette production. Bientôt en ligne sur les plateformes. Maintenant, nous allons passer à Olivier Martinez qui se trouve au premier rang, qui va nous parler des décideurs de l'information.
Bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je vais revenir un peu sur ce que David a exprimé tout à l'heure, sur ce qu'on appelle le multimodal. Jusqu'à présent, chaque émetteur d'une information lui mettait une forme. Vous décidez de la forme de l'information que vous êtes en train de distribuer. Vous la produisez sous une certaine forme. Et ça, depuis la nuit des temps, c'est comme ça que ça se passe. Dans les grottes, on faisait des peintures et la personne qui voyait cette peinture était obligée, en fait, en quelque sorte, d'accepter la forme que vous lui mettiez. On est dans un monde où on parle de modèles de langage et d'IA générative du côté de l'émetteur. Depuis ce matin, on entend beaucoup parler de comment on produit, comment on fait un travail journalistique, comment on travaille en binôme avec ces IA, permettent aux émetteurs, comme l'a montré David tout à l'heure, de pouvoir faire une multitude de formats à partir du premier. Ce n'est pas seulement des technologies qui permettent de produire. En fait, en vrai, c'est des technologies qui permettent d'adapter et de modifier le contenu à l'envie. On prend un texte, on en fait un autre texte, on en fait un résumé, on en fait du speech, on en fait une vidéo, on en fait une présentation, on en fait des images. On fait tout ça avec. Et les médias s'en sont emparés depuis un petit moment, c'est absolument pas nouveau. Là, très rapidement, un exemple en France, c'est celui de 20 minutes, où vous avez dans l'article sa version audio, qui est proposée à l'utilisateur, donc au lecteur, ou un résumé. David en a parlé aussi tout à l'heure, on a des intermédiaires. Par exemple, ici, c'est Artifact qui vous permet d'avoir un résumé de l'article que vous voulez consulter. Et ce résumé, vous l'avez en plusieurs formes. C'est vous qui choisissez la forme. Et puis, on a surtout des gens qui commencent à arriver très très fort, qui s'appellent Google. Tout à l'heure, David a parlé de Bing Chat et de Perplexity, mais Google est en train de tester un système qui s'appelle Search Generative Experience, qui va en fait donner à l'utilisateur un résumé des informations qu'il cherche. Il ne passera même pas par vous, même pas par un article journalistique, même pas par un site d'un éditeur. Et en fait, on ne se pose pas la question, mais actuellement, le vrai changement technologique qui est en train d'arriver, c'est que ces technologies vont être disponibles sur vos smartphones. Les deux derniers smartphones des deux grandes marques, Apple et Google, donc l'iPhone 8 Pro et le Google 8 Pixel, je ne sais plus comment ça s'appelle, mais voilà, ont des puces qui permettent de faire tourner un modèle de langage, c'est-à-dire un modèle qui, pour l'instant, est déporté. Quand vous utilisez ChatGPT, vous tapez dans un ordinateur sur le cloud qui va aller interroger une inférence d'un modèle de langage. Bientôt, vous allez pouvoir le faire directement sur votre device personnel. Et ça change. Il y a un vrai changement de paradigme à ce niveau-là, parce que vous le savez encore mieux que moi, la forme que vous mettez sur un contenu permet de lui donner un sens. Et bien cette forme, elle va pouvoir être changée en quasi temps réel par l'utilisateur à sa convenance. Attention, ça reste pour l'instant des technologies qui sont en cours d'élaboration, mais ça pose beaucoup de questions. Le producteur, la personne qui produit un contenu, met une forme, encore une fois, avec une intentionnalité. Mais cette vision va être perdue. Cette vision peut être perdue. Et ça change totalement la manière dont on doit penser à construire une information. Et puis le corollaire à ça, c'est que la chaîne de valeur aussi, pour les éditeurs, est totalement rompue. Pensez bien qu'actuellement, un site de news a déjà du mal à se financer avec de la pub, des liens sponsors et tout ce qu'il peut y avoir. Imaginez donc si on lui change sa forme, toutes ces pubs, toutes ces histoires de monétisation seront perdues. Alors au final, est-ce que ça va vraiment être quelque chose qui va déferler? Alors en tout cas, c'est la première fois dans l'histoire de l'humanité, dans l'histoire de nos technologies, qu'on peut le faire en temps réel. On peut, déjà depuis l'invention de l'informatique, à un niveau individuel, changer des choses, changer la nature d'un article, le mettre en image, etc. Mais en tout cas, on ne pouvait pas le faire en temps réel et pas sur un device particulier. L'utilisateur, tous ceux qui ont fait un peu de product management, de recherche, sur la manière dont les utilisateurs utilisent les sites d'information ou les applications, savent très bien que sans choix préétabli, en fait, l'utilisateur n'utilise pas. Et je fais exprès d'utiliser, utilisateur n'utilise pas. Il faut donner le choix aux utilisateurs. Il faut faire des pré-choix. Et ces pré-choix, ça va être là que vraiment ces technologies vont prendre sens. Et soit on va les laisser à des gens comme Apple ou Google qui mettront des modèles de langage directement dans leur device, soit peut-être, des éditeurs vont s'en emparer, ils vont pouvoir faire quelque chose, faire une application, faire une surcouche, faire une intermédiation qui va proposer ces choix. La vraie question qui se tourne autour de ça, c'est ces choix, ces pré-choix, en fait, permettent de faire, d'être plus pertinents dans la consommation d'informations au sens large pour l'utilisateur. Jusqu'à présent, on parle depuis ce matin de l'abondance, de la surabondance que ces outils vont pouvoir donner à toutes les informations. On va pouvoir créer des tonnes et des tonnes et des tonnes d'informations. On n'a pas beaucoup parlé des fake news, mais on pourra en parler très très longtemps. Ces outils vont aussi avoir un pouvoir de l'autre côté, c'est-à-dire sur l'utilisateur qui va pouvoir dire « je veux des news pertinentes pour moi », mais pas seulement dans le fond, dans la forme. Et c'est quelque chose qui va forcément changer le regard et la manière dont les éditeurs travaillent et mettent en œuvre des sites pour diffuser de l'information. Je crois que c'est tout. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Jumil Mehta, he's associated professor in data journalism at Columbia University. He's also the deputy director of the TOE Center, which is run by Emily Bell. Welcome.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm here to talk to you about some of the efficiencies that Charlie Beckett was talking about. We're seeing those at the journalism school, and we have students in all parts of Columbia Journalism School who have supercharged their data journalism workflow. And so I'm here to tell you a bit more about what I've seen in the past year. I teach at the Columbia Journalism School. I'm also a visiting professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. You can see some of the classes that I teach here. Prior to my time at Columbia, I was a database journalist, and before that I was a software engineer, so my background is in computer science. First, I would like to see just a quick show of hands. How often do you use ChatGPT? So if you use it on a daily or weekly basis, can you raise your hand? Okay, I'm especially interested in the students in the back. For a few specific tasks on occasion? Okay. How about, I've tried them, but I don't use them regularly. Okay, and anybody who has not used it at all, don't worry, we won't shame you. Oh wow, everybody has, incredible. So students and professors have been using language models like ChatGPT regularly. I personally use it daily for everything I do. And I've sort of put these examples into 4 categories. I've squeezed as many of them as I can into 10 minutes, but there's so much more happening. So learn things, do things, find things, and build things. But at the end of the day, we do it in pursuit of our journalistic goals. We have 3 types of students I want to tell you about really quickly, because these students vary vastly in terms of their prior technical learning. We've got our general MS students. They may be specializing in things other than data, video, podcast, etc., but they have data as part of their workflow. We have a 3-semester data journalism MS program. Those are the students that I primarily teach. And then we also have a computer science and journalism dual master's program, which are really impressive students who get into both the computer science master's and the journalism master's simultaneously. And all of these students, regardless of where they've begun, have supercharged their data workflows with language models. So let's start with the things they're learning. This is a sample assignment from one of the investigative journalism classes. They're looking at some data from the World Bank, and you can see some projects over there. And their assignment was to write an Excel formula or to get ChatGPT to help them write an Excel formula to check if these projects took more or less than 10 years to close. For those of you that work with data, you can already see some problems there. Column C and column D have some blanks, so it's not terribly straightforward. Most of these students, we've asked them, have you used ChatGPT to try to learn Excel? They were very new. This is first semester. They just got into school. They said, yeah, we tried it, but it didn't really work, and then I sort of abandoned it, right? Here's the first couple of prompts that some of them put in. One student said, create an Excel function that identifies if there's a value of 10 difference between the 2 numbers. And because they said create an Excel function, ChatGPT gave them some Visual Basic code, which is not at all what they were trying to do. They're just trying to do some basic spreadsheet work. Here's somebody on the right that said create a code for Google Sheet to create a column to identify blah, blah, blah. And because they use this phrase, create a code, ChatGPT gives them Google Apps script, which is also not at all what they're trying to do. They just want to create a basic Excel formula, right? Eventually, one student decides he's going to put the spreadsheet, or the first couple rows of the spreadsheet, into ChatGPT, and he gets much better responses. And then he's saying, create a column to identify if the project's lasted more than 10 years from approval to closing. So now we're starting to use the vocabulary that is native to that software, right? Create a column, use a formula. And then on the right, you can see that continues to improve. And he says, column H is a list of years, column I is a list of years. Can you write a formula for a new column? So as he starts to use the vocabulary that's native to spreadsheets, he starts getting better and better responses. This is something that we'd been doing sort of informally. We hadn't built prompt engineering into our curriculum, but I just realized one day, I was thinking, am I teaching prompt engineering now? And yes, in fact, that is what we were doing. What I found is the responses, for example, that last one initially came from a student who had some computational background already. And so writing prompt is a form of computational thinking, and it unlocks new computational skills. So whether you're going from spreadsheets to code or code to something else or whatever it is that you're doing, the students who already had computational background knew how to talk to the machine a little bit better, even if they hadn't really interacted with these kinds of tools before. So thinking computationally, we've also found that ChatGPT is a great way to introduce students to computational thinking who haven't had any prior background to this. By the end of that session, most of them sort of figured out how to use ChatGPT as an Excel tutor, and it sort of supercharged their workflow going forward. This is, for those of you who make charts and graphics, you know that you'll quickly run into the limitations of online tools like Data Wrapper. For example, creating 5 mini charts like this is very easy with code, but very difficult with certain online tools like Data Wrapper, unless they support them natively. But what ChatGPT has helped us do is really focus on the concepts and leave a lot of the coding, get assistance with some of the coding. So this is a lesson that I generally teach data students when we're trying to decide whether it will be the end of the first semester or the beginning of the second semester. And this year, I was able to give this talk to prospective students, students who have not even enrolled in the university yet. And this is the kind of stuff we were doing. For those of you who don't know how to code, this looks pretty complicated. For those of you that do, you know it's fairly simple. This is ggplot in R. And when you build a plot in R, you kind of have these layers. ggplot stands for, it's based on the grammar of graphics, so there's some structure to this. And so if you know these plots are built with a data layer, then an aesthetics layer, then a geometry layer, then facets and statistics, and each piece of the code sort of corresponds to one of those layers, then you can learn how to build these plots with the assistance of ChatGPT. So you don't necessarily need to know how to type all of this out. You can just tell ChatGPT, hey, can you add a geometry layer now? I'd actually like to facet by boroughs. New York City has 5 boroughs, so you can see they've gotten 5 subplots per borough. But these are the things that with a 20-minute conversation with students who have not even enrolled in Columbia yet, we explained to them the structure of the grammar of graphics, and they were able to start producing stuff like this in that 1-hour session. One of the things we do in the data journalism program, these are students who sort of know how to code, or we're sort of teaching them how to code at school. And we've always historically taught this program mostly in Python. Last year, for the first time, we decided to just simultaneously teach it in Python and R, because the fundamental concepts are kind of the same. And if you know how to do something in Python, you can just tell ChatGPT, hey, can you do this in R as well? Or can you show me how to go back and forth between the two? Or if you make an error in syntax, it will just help you fix that. It also allows you to translate skills from one domain to another. Those are a couple of lessons from learning things. I'll go through a couple of more examples. But we really encourage students to think about this, especially when it comes to coding, as a tool rather than an assistant. Not something that does work for you, but something that helps you do the work better. And that way you're still conceptually engaged with what it is that you're trying to do. All right, I'll go through a couple more things. So this is data analysis, which I had a student in my class from Denmark. She was talking about a story about various points in Denmark. She was presenting in the class. And I said, I don't really know where any of these things are, so let's just quickly make a map of these places. So I asked, also, don't mind the weird font. I've installed this extension to make ChatGPT look a little bit magical, so you don't take it too seriously. So I use that when I present in class. You notice it starts to do some stuff, and I usually ignore most of this kind of output. It produced some Python code, which I ran and made a map. And now, as she was presenting sort of in real time in class, we were able to see where all these places in Denmark were and sort of tell the story a little bit better. Now, what you'll notice here is that we have a checkable artifact that comes out of the ChatGPT output, right? And so when you're doing data analysis with the help of ChatGPT, it produces these checkable artifacts, and then your task becomes not to write the code, but to verify that it did it correctly, right? And so you'll notice in this example, for the most part, if you trust Folium, the library, the Python library that's being used, the only information that it's really pulling out of thin air is the latitudes and longitudes of these cities, which you can go and double check, right? We'll do all kinds of other tasks like scraping with the assistance of ChatGPT. But as we are doing tasks, sometimes you're not trying to learn the tool, you're just trying to get something done. I encourage students to think of themselves as quantitative editors. So they have just hired an overly confident intern from the Columbia School of Journalism. Definitely not from Columbia, and definitely not from Sciences Po, because we know students from here make 0 mistakes, right? The student makes a lot of mistakes, you've given them a task, and they've come back with an answer. Now it's your job to vet the answer, right? So you have to think a lot more like an editor than like the producer of that work. So ChatGPT does something, you validate the output, improve the prompt, and sort of keep going until you've figured out a way to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. The other thing to note is that reading code has become a way, way more useful skill than it used to be. So while, even if you're not able to produce the code yourself, if you're able to read it, then you can vet it, and with the help of ChatGPT, you can do journalistic work that requires code without a ton of additional effort. So I think we're going to end up with a lot more editors who know how to read code, hopefully, in the coming years. A couple more things. For those of you who are familiar with embeddings, embeddings are a way in which these large language models take text, whether it's a word, a sentence, or an entire article, and convert them into these vectors of meaning. So you get these, this is from the OpenAI website, but you get kind of some semblance of semantics, because you can see that this sentence on the bottom left is very different from the one on the top right. So now we get into what some of the dual degree students are doing, the ones that are also enrolled in the computer science school. One of the things that one of the students is working on is something that I'm calling semantic scraping. So for example, if I gave them a list of all of the college newspapers websites in the country, and I said, get me the names of the editors-in-chief. A few years ago, that would have been 100 different scrapers. Now you can use sort of semantic scraping, which in a place like the United States, where we have 50 different states who each do elections very differently and multiple locales that do things very differently, this kind of unlocks a new sort of data gathering that wasn't really possible before. Difficult NLP tasks. So, if you're trying to identify how often a particular person or a subject is quoted versus referred to in a news articles or in a 10,000 news articles, that becomes really difficult to do without the help of these sorts of language models. So we've got some dual degree students who are working on this sort of thing as part of their thesis. How many people have used a Google alert before? Most journalists who are deep in a beat, you've got something that you're following. I used to do public opinion polls, so every time a new poll came out, I wanted to know. The Washington Post tracks every time they're made aware of a police officer in the US who shoots a civilian. And these alerts can be quite noisy, and so one of the things that we're doing is rapidly prototyping using ChatGPT to clean up those results. So for example, we have a search here that's journalist or newsroom and AI policy. That's going to get us a lot of news articles that are about journalists who are talking about AI policies. But what I'm trying to collect is just every time a newsroom releases a new AI policy, right? So you can supplement your Google alert with a classifier. This kind of machine learning is not new. It was definitely doable before, but the economics of it were difficult. You have to go talk to your editor, convince them to hire somebody, like put together a bunch of examples. Now we can rapidly prototype this stuff, and if the first example works, then I can go to my editor and say, hey, let's put in some money, train a model that does this a little bit better, and sort of knock out a task like that. So we've got a dual degree student who's working on sort of unlocking better semantic search for journalists. And this is one of the initial outputs that it produced. So the lessons here, when you're finding stuff, you can find stuff with semantics, extracting structure from unstructured text, And risk reduction. I think this is the biggest benefit I've seen, is a lot of these things were possible in the past, but now even if you don't have computational training, you can experiment with it in ChatGPT. If it works out well, then you can take it to your local programmer and say, hey, can we do this on 60,000 documents instead of 5, right? And lastly, build things. This is a piece that I wrote with a researcher at the Tao Center called Trouble in Wyoming. It was about a right-wing news outlet it was about a news outlet that was funded by a Republican mega donor who had decided he was unhappy with the sort of coverage that they were, and it was very pro-oil and gas. We wrote this news article about Cowboy State Daily, and it came with, so we sort of scraped every article that was written by this news website. That was also, so this is sort of front to back was done with the help of ChatGPT, the scraping. Then I produced this, we took all of those things, turned them into embeddings, so you get sort of a map of, semantic map of everything that this news outlet has covered, which you can see in the background over there. But even the front-facing, like producing that into an interactive graphic that readers could see, was also done initially in ChatGPT. So you can see here my prompt. I have a CSV file named this with the following columns, show me the code that makes a scatter plot in D3 with a tooltip. This kind of thing would have taken me a day and a half at least. And I don't really do much front-end coding. I'm more of a databases guy. In 10 minutes, I had a working demo. And within another couple of hours, I had my final version of this. And lastly, I'm getting married soon. I'm going tomorrow, actually, to go get married. And thank you. And I built the wedding website with my fiance, who does not know how to code at all, with the help of ChatGPT. It collects RSVPs. It does sort of everything. But the cool thing was collaborating. We're seeing this workflow in the school as well. People who know how to code collaborating much better with people who don't know how to code. We came up with 5 prototypes or so in an hour, and then we picked one, and it was a really fun activity that we did together. A year ago, that would have been, okay, you have an idea, now watch me code for an hour, and then we'll produce something. I've also seen at the school, though, students in other parts of the school, especially the investigative program, they have thousands of documents they're working with. They come up with an idea, they test it out a few times in ChatGPT, they get just the right prompt, and they say, can we do this for the entire document set? Then we end up pairing them with one of our data students and sort of helping them to parse through that trove of documents. So it's really sort of supercharged collaboration as well. I love this. There's a book called Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. And for those who are sort of in a more institutional context, if you're looking for some of the most useful sort of ways to use ChatGPT, find the people that are doing the boring, repetitive tasks and help. You can use large language models. I used to every day wake up in the morning and identify all of the new public opinion polls that came out in US elections and enter them into a database. And it would have been wonderful to have something like this to assist with that. But then don't fire those people, give them more meaningful work to do instead. A couple last things. At Columbia, we've implemented AI office hours. So we offer 2 services. Students will fill out this Google form. They can either come with an idea and we help them flesh out like how might you use this idea, or if they've used AI for something, we offer an AI edit where they can come and bulletproof their work. And we also have these dine and design sessions where students just get together and build stuff. I'm also just want to quickly pitch, if you're an educator, AIpedagogy.org has just launched. I'm helping to maintain the journalism lesson plans in this data set, in this website. It's from the Meta Lab at Harvard. And that's it. Please feel free to contact me, but I won't reply because I'm off getting married, so thank you.
Thank you so much, and happy marriage.
Thank you.
Last speaker, she's connected online. Her name is Gina Chua. She's the executive editor at Semaphore. You know the website that is that publish every Monday morning, I think, a newsletter, and so many other things. She will have the final word.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, and we will see you.
Can
yes.
you see me?
Thank you.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be there in Paris to join all of you. I'm sure there's been all sorts of really interesting discussions. I just heard Drumil, which was great. I'm missing all that. I'm missing all the good food, and I would just say I'd much rather be in Paris right now than up at 6:30 in the morning in New York. But okay, here we are. So I want to talk a little bit less about sort of the here and now and what can be done, and more about the where do we go after this, assuming things kind of work out. So let me start with a sort of a question. What's a better mode of transport, a horse or a car? And it depends, right? Cars go faster, they go longer, and they can carry more. But horses are better on mountain paths, they climb obstacles, and they generally don't go off cliffs if you fall asleep at the wheel. So yes, they both provide transportation, but cars aren't superior horses or vice versa. And it's not helpful to think of them in those ways, right? There's apples and oranges, or technically horses and cars. And so it is with large language models and generative AI more broadly, and journalism. So most of the conversation that I hear around LLMs in the future tends to cluster around how well or how badly LLMs do the current task of journalism, and what the risks are if we outsource, the work that humans currently do to machines, or for that matter, how the machines can take away all of the things that we hate to do so that we can focus on things we want to do. And I don't want to make light of those many challenges that LLMs bring to the world of information and disinformation, not least kind of deep fakes and the ability to craft highly personal appeals that sway people at scale. But I worry that we can focus too much on those issues, on questions of efficiencies, on possible job losses, on areas of kind of assumed human superiority, rather than on how incredibly transformative LLMs will be on the industry. In other words, if you take the other analogy, to just look at the advent of cars in terms of how well they mimic horses, and in doing so, you kind of miss how cars came to transform transportation, cities, and societies. So what do I mean? So first, let's stipulate that LLMs are in their infancy, right? They have flaws, they hallucinate, they will get better. And some of the work that's being done now on building out sort of smaller models that restrict the information that they can draw from is really interesting, right? As well as the ability to build your own specialized bots, which is, I mean, I spent this weekend and in a couple of hours, I built 3 bots. They're not particularly good bots, but it shows me kind of, as Drumil was saying, sort of they're all the equivalent of proof of concepts. And I can talk a little bit more about them later on. LLMs are already sort of very effective proofreaders and basic editors. We use them to do that at Semaphore. I can see how, a world where copy editors use a basic bot to go over a story before they start to dive in themselves. And in many cases there, I would see, significant efficiencies and probably some quality gains as well, because in fact, they're pretty good at proofreading, far better than humans are. But that's not transformational, right? Let's take another case. So Reuters, I spent 10 years there until recently, employs about 2,500 journalists around the world, many of whom do not have English as a first language, but are needed to publish in English. So, the workaround that Reuters has is that they have bureau chiefs, many of whom are native English speakers, who usually help turn that excellent local reporting from local reporters into stories for the English language feed. Why can't LLMs do a lot of that work? For that matter, how transformative will they be for the reporters who are great at reporting, but mediocre at writing, right? I mean, journalism is both, after all, right? We have to get facts, and then we have to turn those facts into a coherent narrative. Journalists have historically needed to be at least passively good at both. LLMs may render one of those skills far less important, at least for day-to-day reporting. And, let's face it, most of what we do is day-to-day reporting. how can LLMs reinvent the current model of news creation, which is built around, again, 100 and 150-year-old technology of writing one story and trying to get it to as many people as possible. And that was just the economics and the technology at the time. And instead allow us to customize stories for individual readers or communities based on their specific interests and knowledge. So, for example, a story about Singapore, which is where I'm from, doesn't need to tell me it's a small island republic in Asia, but for some of the readers, it might. You can't do that at scale, but LLMs can make us, give us that ability. Or for that matter, do stories need even to be stories? We've seen how well and how badly LLMs function as chatbots, but could we tell stories that way, providing us with information we need in response to interrogation from us, right? Remember how, I don't, maybe you don't remember, but this is what I was told when I was growing up. We use the analogy when you want to write a story, it's like, well, just imagine you're at a bar and you're telling somebody what happened. Well, actually, nobody ever writes a story that way, but we might perhaps be able to do this for real. If you can imagine a chatbot that goes, you know, hey, what happened today? Well, there was a fire down the street. Oh my, was anybody hurt? No, thankfully not. Where was it and what happened? Well, it was that big house down the street at the corner, and the fire department said it was an electrical fire. You know, okay, what happened next? So you can sort of see a conversation that works that way, that you could easily go deeper in, you know, tell me, you know, more about the fire, how many fires have been on this street. Or you could say, oh, well, I know about that. I'm not interested in fires. Tell me what else happened. And, you know, we've seen sort of the beginnings of this with things like Alexa, but, you know, let's face it, they're all incredibly basic. What they do is really just kind of read the news to you. We could actually build something completely different, but we have to have the imagination to rethink what the journalism product is. It's not necessarily a piece of narrative. LLMs can also, as I think Drew Mill has pointed out, help us make sense of all the embedded information in our notes and in our world. So imagine a tool that pulls together related and unrelated strands of information from across newsrooms and presents them to reporters as they're working on a story. I mean, sort of an upgraded Clippy, which is, I noticed you're writing about X, you know, here's the last 15 stories, or here's what your reporter across the hall has in their notebooks. This has been sort of a pipe dream of newsrooms forever, and everybody has tried to build a system or two, and most have failed pretty badly. But you know, this weekend, that's one of the bots I built, feeding in essentially our published stories and just interrogating it. Tell me about this. I can show it if you wanted to see it. And it works really well on a very small data set, does not hallucinate dramatically. And so that's sort of an interesting exercise. The other bot I built was a style guide. I'm with the Trans Journalists Association. We have a sort of fairly detailed style guide. Nobody actually ever goes to a style guide except for copy editors. It's one of those things that's just a pain to read. And I built a style guide that you can interrogate, and it actually works pretty well. And the goal there would be put a story in and tell me, you know, where it seems to be violating some of the guidelines for style. I mean, so these are things that we couldn't do before without hiring a ton of people. And this opens up sort of new vistas. I've been playing with another use case too, which is taking an LLM to help unpick from a published story what the verifiable facts are. You know, the mayor's 35 years old versus what the assumptions are or the reporter's analysis is. The mayor doesn't have enough experience to do a difficult job. That's less about the process of journalism, but it's more about a journalism adjacent product. It's much more about how we could improve media literacy, how we can give readers more confidence in what they're reading by allowing them to understand what is, in fact, asserted as a fact and what is the analysis. And either could be valuable, both could be valuable, but it's much easier for readers who haven't spent a lot of time digging into the structure of stories as we have to be able to understand that. So, I mean, I could go on for hours, right? How much will LLMs transform how much we think about archive and older stories? What it can do, as the Philippine website Rappler is already doing, to help create graphics, graphic novels and visual narratives at scale. How can it help us extend our reach with audio stories in the multiple languages and dialects, as a newsroom in Brazil is currently experimenting with? I guess my point really is that LLMs will be the biggest issue, the biggest technology, the biggest opportunity, and the biggest risk that news organizations and journalists will have to grapple with in the next just few years. Much, not all, but much of what we do as journalists is language. We're confronted now with a tool that can understand words in some sense of that, and at the very least pull contextual information out of reams of text that was in a way that was nearly humanly impossible before. One that can create narratives, however currently imperfectly, on demand and at scale, at nearly no incremental cost, which is something entirely impossible to do before. So what task can it take over from humans? And more importantly, what new task can it do that humans couldn't do before? And of course, the flip side of that question, what are the tasks that humans can do better than machines? What skills are needed to do that? Again, as Drumil has pointed out, you know, the computational thinking, the prompt engineering, the ability to read code. And how can we ensure that audiences feel comfortable with the changes that we're making? You know, for the moment, at least, humans are better at fact gathering, even if LLMs and other machines may be better at identifying patterns at scale. Critically, humans are better at asking questions, at framing ideas, and being innovative at finding new ways to find out new things. Humans are better at verifying information, at least for now, and need to be in the loop as we lean into machines to create stories or extract information. The goal here is really to marry human strengths with machine strengths, rather than try to get one to be an imperfect version of the other. And this is what I call the cybernetic newsroom. And that's the idea, I think, as we go forward. What does it mean for skills? Will writing and language be less important, at least for many workaday journalists? And if that's the case, how will they build their skills if they're not using them regularly? Hardcore coding skills, again, as Drumil showed, may be less critical, but computational thinking, understanding how machines work and how to talk to them, may become more important. Understanding audiences and their information needs and translating those into story ideas and products will grow in value. And obviously, critical thinking and verification will continue to be at a premium. But mostly, I think imagination is going to be what we need. The ability to understand not just what can be done by marrying machines and humans, but what should be done. The ability to think beyond what we currently do and create new things that fulfill our public service mission in better ways. So back in 2011, I created something at Reuters called Connected China, and it was to map the power structure in China. It is, I'll show it to you for a second. There we go. It is genuinely one of the most beautiful things I've ever done. You can see it. It shows how relationships map in China. Whoops, let me just, oh, I have no idea how to, oh, there we go, stop sharing. Okay. It took 18 people, 18 months to do. It was lovely. It really gave information in a completely different way. And it was one of the best big steps in network analysis, which at the time, 10 years ago, was really built around sort of co-mentions of entities in the same sentence. This was completely unsustainable, right? I mean, I blew $1 million of Reuters money to build this as a one-time basis, and I'm amazed I did not get fired. So 6 months ago, I visited Microsoft and sat down and went through a bunch of things with them and watched them drop some text into a system. This was like a story about some people. And it spit out a network map like this in seconds, and based on the semantic analysis of the words in there. And so it was just astonishing and humbling and eye-opening to think that $1 million 10 years ago, you can now do with a tool. So it's just a lesson to me that LLMs are really going to transform this information landscape, and with that, journalism. for our sake, for the sake of the publics that we serve, we need to be on the forward edge of that revolution. We need, by all means, to be wary of grand promises and worried about the potential for harm. We need to make sure the public understands what we're doing, and we need to be transparent with them about how we use technology. But above all, we need to be open to the possibilities and opportunities this will afford, even if they upturn everything we are used to and how we see our place in the world. I mean, cars have done some horrible things to the world, right? And we would perhaps be better off with fewer cars and more horses. But clinging to the way of horses in an age of cars, or hoping to build a world of horse-like cars, instead of embracing what advantages cars have, that's a recipe for becoming irrelevant. There's a quote often attributed to the astronomer J.B.S. Haldane that goes, "The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine." Our job is to try to imagine a world with LLMs, what it looks like, and stake out our place in it before it's staked out for us. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the time. Let's jump to...
Yeah, I'm up early.
Sorry for that, and sorry for the food. We can't send you anything right now, but feel free to take a coffee and some donuts. So thank you so much for your time, and see you soon, I hope, in Paris, in real. Merci beaucoup. Thank you to everybody, especially to the students who made big efforts to have a special coverage online. You will see pictures, videos, stories, edits, articles, and everything online. Thank you very much. Merci à l'équipe qui a assuré pour l'organisation, et on se retrouve